This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff. I'd roll my eyes at those ghost hunting shows my roommate loved watching. But something happened last month that I still can't explain, and I haven't been able to sleep well since. My Uncle Ray has this old farmhouse in Oak Ridge, about 40 minutes outside the city where I live. It's not ancient or anything, built maybe in the 70s, but it sits on this huge piece of land surrounded by cornfields and has that classic farmhouse vibe. Wood floors that creak, narrow hallways, those weird little nooks that old houses have. When he asked if I could house sit for a weekend while he went to his high school reunion, I thought, why not? I'd get a quiet weekend away from my noisy apartment complex, and all I had to do was feed his dog Buddy, a sweet golden retriever mix who's basically a living teddy bear. I arrived Friday afternoon around 4. Uncle Ray showed me around, though I'd been there plenty of times before. He reminded me where everything was. The breaker box in case the power went out, where he kept Buddy's food, and warned me that the hot water takes forever to heat up. Normal stuff, nothing ominous or weird. After he left, I settled in with some snacks and my laptop, planning to binge watch that new series everyone's been talking about. It was honestly kind of nice being alone in the quiet house with just Buddy for company. He followed me everywhere, tail wagging, probably hoping I'd drop some of my chips. The sun set around 7:30, and that's when the countryside gets dark. Not city dark where there's still light pollution. I mean pitch black outside the windows. I turned on pretty much every light in the house because it started feeling a little creepy. But still, nothing unusual happened that first evening. I went to bed around 11 in the guest room, which is down this long hallway from the living room. Buddy curled up at the foot of my bed, and I fell asleep scrolling through TikTok. Saturday started normal enough. I woke up, took Buddy for a long walk around the property, made some breakfast, and video called my mom. The weird stuff didn't start until that evening. It was maybe 6 o'clock and I was making dinner in the kitchen. Buddy had been napping on the living room rug, but suddenly jumped up and ran into the hallway. At first, I figured he heard something outside, maybe a raccoon or deer. But when I looked, he was just standing there, completely still, staring toward the back bedroom, Uncle Ray's room. His entire body was rigid and the fur along his spine was standing straight up. "What's wrong, Buddy?" I asked, walking over to him. He didn't move or acknowledge me, just kept staring down that hallway. I felt a chill run through me, but I tried to be logical. This is an old house in the country, probably mice in the walls or something outside the window. I walked past Buddy, who actually whimpered when I moved toward the bedroom and checked Uncle Ray's room. Nothing seemed out of place. The window was closed and locked. I even checked under the bed and in the closet, feeling stupid the whole time. Who looks under the bed for monsters at 24 years old? Finding nothing, I went back to the kitchen, but Buddy stayed in the hallway for another 5 minutes, just staring. Finally, he shook himself and trotted back to the living room, but he seemed on edge. I locked the bedroom door anyway, just because it made me feel better. I managed to convince myself it was nothing and went back to making dinner. I ate on the couch with Buddy curled up beside me, watching some reality show and trying to ignore how quiet the house felt between the TV dialogue. Around 9, I was scrolling through Instagram when I heard it. A distinct creaking sound from the guest room. Not the normal settling noises old houses make, but the unmistakable sound of mattress springs compressing, like someone had just sat down on the bed. I froze, my thumb hovering over my phone screen. Buddy heard it too. His head shot up and he started whining, this high-pitched, terrified sound I'd never heard him make before. Then he scrambled behind the couch, practically shoving himself into the gap between the furniture and the wall. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something fell in the room, but I knew exactly what that sound was. Anyone who's ever sat on a spring mattress knows that sound. I sat there paralyzed for maybe 2 minutes, straining to hear any other noises. The house was completely silent, except for Buddy's whimpering. I couldn't make myself get up and check the room. What if someone was actually in there, or worse? What if I checked and found nothing but still heard noises? I grabbed my phone and quietly went into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I felt ridiculous sitting on the closed toilet lid, but at least there was only one way in and out of the small bathroom. I called my cousin Amber, who grew up visiting this house with me. "Hey, what's up?" she answered, music playing in the background. "This is going to sound crazy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm at Uncle Ray's and I swear I just heard something in the guest room." "Like what?" I could hear her turning down her music, like someone sat on the bed. The springs creaked. There was a pause, and then Amber laughed. She actually laughed. "Oh, that house does weird stuff all the time." "What do you mean, weird stuff?" I demanded, feeling my anxiety spike. "It's just an old house, Megan. The pipes make noise. The wood contracts at night. Uncle Ray always said the same thing when we got scared as kids." "Buddy's freaking out too," I said. "He's hiding behind the couch. Dogs are sensitive. Maybe he heard a coyote outside or something." She wasn't taking me seriously, and I felt stupid for calling. We talked for a few more minutes, with her telling me to just turn the TV up louder and stop letting my imagination run wild. By the time we hung up, I felt both embarrassed and still terrified. I stayed in that bathroom for at least an hour, scrolling mindlessly through social media and jumping at every tiny sound. Eventually, I started feeling ridiculous. This was my uncle's house, not some haunted mansion. I was a grown woman hiding in a bathroom because of a creaky mattress. Finally, I unlocked the door and stepped back into the living room. Buddy was still behind the couch, but wagged his tail when he saw me. The house was silent. I don't know what possessed me to do what I did next. Maybe it was to prove to myself I was being stupid, or maybe it was because I'd seen too many ghost hunting shows despite claiming to hate them. I stood in the middle of the living room and said out loud, "If anybody's here, make a sound." I felt ridiculous immediately after saying it. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet house. Nothing happened, of course. I laughed nervously at myself and sat back down on the couch, grabbing the remote to find something mindless to watch. I was just starting to relax when it happened. Exactly 2 minutes after I'd asked for a sign, 2 distinct knocks came from the wall directly behind the couch. Not random house-settling noises, not something that could be explained away. 2 deliberate knocks, like someone using their knuckles, from the exact wall I was leaning against. I literally couldn't move. It felt like my blood had turned to ice. Buddy started that high-pitched whining again. Those knocks were so clear, so purposeful, like whatever was there had waited just long enough to make sure I wasn't expecting a response anymore. I don't remember getting up, but suddenly I was grabbing Buddy's leash with shaking hands and practically dragging him to the front door. He didn't resist. He seemed just as eager to get out of the house as I was. I didn't even grab a jacket, just my phone and keys. Outside in the cold night air, I felt like I could breathe again. I walked Buddy up and down the gravel driveway, staying in the security light's glow. My mind was racing. What the hell had just happened? I'd asked for a sign, and something had answered me. Something in the house had heard me and deliberately responded. I was contemplating sleeping in my car when headlights appeared on the long driveway leading to the house. For a second I was terrified, but then recognized Amber's beat-up Honda. She pulled up beside me and I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees almost buckled. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, getting out of her car. Before I could answer, her expression changed. She looked past me toward the house, her face draining of color. "Megan," she said slowly, "I just saw someone walk past the kitchen window." My relief vanished instantly. "What? No? That's impossible. I've been out here with Buddy." "I swear to God, Megan, when I was pulling up I saw a figure dart past the window. I thought it was you until I saw you standing out here." We stared at each other. both of us processing what this meant. Someone, or something, was inside the house. We should call the police, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let me check first, Amber said, already walking toward the house. Are you insane? You just saw someone in there. It could have been a reflection or something, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Still, she headed for the front door with a determination I couldn't understand. I followed her, keeping Buddy close beside me. I couldn't let her go in alone, even though every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away. We searched the entire house together, turning on every light, opening every closet and cabinet big enough to hide a person. Nothing. No sign of anyone. All the windows were locked from the inside. The back door was still bolted. See? Nothing, Amber said, but her face was still pale. We ended up sitting in the living room with all the lights on, Buddy between us on the couch. Amber had calmed down, but I couldn't stop shaking. I heard knocking, Amber, right after I asked if anyone was there. She was quiet for a moment. There's something I never told you about this house, she finally said. Uncle Ray made us promise not to talk about it because he thought it would scare the younger kids. Talk about what? Before Uncle Ray bought this place, it belonged to a family with a little girl named Emma. She had some kind of mental issues, like serious problems. They said she was cruel to animals and would talk to people who weren't there. My stomach dropped. Emma. Yeah. She died young, some kind of accident. That's why the family sold the place to Uncle Ray so cheap. Emma is your middle name, I said, the random thought popping into my head. Yeah, it was my grandmother's name. Common enough. We stayed up until dawn talking, Amber trying to convince me it was all just coincidence and an old house making noise. But she couldn't explain what she'd seen in the window. When Uncle Ray came back Sunday afternoon, I made up some excuse about not feeling well and left immediately. I've never told him what happened. What would I even say? I haven't been back to that house since. Not even during daylight hours. Uncle Ray has invited me over for dinner twice, but I've made excuses. I can't make myself walk down that hallway again or sit on that couch knowing something knocked on the wall behind it. Something that heard me and wanted me to know it was there. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just an old house and my imagination. Maybe it was the ghost of a disturbed little girl. All I know is that when I asked if anyone was there, something answered, and that's enough for me to never want to find out more. Story 2. I still can't fully explain what happened that night in the woods. This was about 7 years ago when I was 16. My brother Thomas was 17, and we were hanging out with our two friends, Jake and Mark. It was late October in the Midlands, and we were bored out of our minds as usual. Mark had just gotten his license that summer, and his parents let him use their old Vauxhall sometimes. That day, Thomas suggested we drive out to this forest about 20 minutes outside our village. He claimed he and some other lads from school had built a den out there the previous summer, just a crude shelter made from fallen branches and tarps where they'd smoke and drink away from parents and teachers. The four of us had nothing better to do, so we piled into Mark's car around 4 in the afternoon. It was that time of year when the days were getting noticeably shorter, but we figured we had enough daylight left. The weather was typical English autumn, grey, damp and chilly, but not raining at least. I remember the drive vividly. We were listening to some Arctic Monkeys album, talking about school drama and girls none of us had any real chance with, normal teenage stuff. The roads got increasingly narrow as we left the main routes, until finally we turned onto a muddy track that led to a small clearing that served as a makeshift car park. When we arrived, there weren't any other vehicles around, which wasn't surprising given how isolated the place was. The forest looked dense and uninviting in the fading daylight, but Thomas insisted the den wasn't far in, maybe 10 or 15 minutes walking. It's just past that big fallen oak, then left at the weird-shaped boulder, he said, pointing to a barely visible path between the trees. We grabbed our phones and a couple of flashlights from Mark's glove compartment, though we didn't think we'd need them yet. Thomas led the way, pushing aside branches and pointing out landmarks he recognized, or claimed to recognize anyway. After about 20 minutes of walking, I started to get concerned. The light was fading faster than I expected, and Thomas kept hesitating at junctions in the path. "Are you sure you know where we're going?" I asked him. "Yeah, of course. It's just been a while," he said. But I could tell he was getting unsure. It should be just past this next clearing. But it wasn't, and neither was it past the next one. We'd been walking for nearly 40 minutes now, and the forest had grown significantly darker. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the gaps between them filled with shadows. We all had our phone flashlights on by this point, but they only created small pools of light that somehow made the surrounding darkness feel even more oppressive. "Thomas, we should head back," Jake said. "It's getting proper dark now." Thomas looked annoyed, but nodded reluctantly. "Let's try one more path. I swear it's familiar." We followed him down a narrow track that dipped into a small hollow. The ground was soft and damp, and I remember the smell, that rich, earthy scent of decaying leaves and moss. As we descended into the hollow, the temperature seemed to drop noticeably. I zipped my jacket up to my chin. That's when we heard it. At first I thought it might be the wind, but there wasn't any breeze. It was a humming sound. A cracked, elderly man's voice humming a tune I didn't recognize. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried clearly through the trees, and it sounded close, too close. We all froze. Mark's flashlight beam darted frantically between the trees. "Hello?" Thomas called out, his voice cracking slightly. The humming stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "Is someone there?" Thomas tried again. Nothing. Just the absolute stillness of the forest. "There's no cars but ours," Jake whispered. "How would someone else even be out here?" That's when the humming started again, but from a different direction. Behind us, back up the path we'd just come down. It was the same cracked, elderly voice, the same unrecognizable melody. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "Let's go," I said, my voice barely audible. "Yeah," Thomas agreed. All his earlier confidence evaporated. We started moving back up the path toward where we thought the car was. The humming stopped again as soon as we moved. We picked up our pace, not running yet, but walking faster than before. No one spoke. The only sounds were our footsteps on the soft ground and our increasingly rapid breathing. Then the humming started again, this time from somewhere to our right. It sounded no closer or farther than before, as if whoever or whatever was making the sound was keeping pace with us, moving parallel through the trees. That's when we broke into a run. I don't know if it was instinct or panic, but suddenly all four of us were sprinting through the forest. Branches whipped at our faces and arms. Someone, I think it was Mark, tripped and fell but scrambled back to his feet so quickly I barely registered it happening. The humming followed us. Sometimes it seemed to come from the left, sometimes from the right, sometimes from directly behind us, but it never got any closer or any farther away, always just at the edge of hearing, that cracked elderly voice humming its unknown tune. I have no idea how we found our way back to the car. I don't think any of us was thinking clearly enough to navigate. Maybe it was just luck, or maybe our panicked flight happened to take us in the right direction. But suddenly we burst out of the tree line and there was Mark's Vauxhall sitting alone in the small clearing. Mark fumbled with his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the doors. We piled in, breathing hard, and he started the engine immediately. The headlights cut through the growing darkness, illuminating the edge of the forest we'd just fled from. There was nothing there. No movement, no figure, nothing to explain the humming that had chased us through the trees. Mark reversed sharply, then spun the car around and accelerated down the muddy track. No one spoke. The only sound was our heavy breathing and the Arctic monkeys still playing quietly on the stereo. Someone reached forward and switched it off. We drove for maybe 5 minutes before Mark suddenly pulled over at a lay-by. He was shaking, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What the fuck was that?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "I don't know," Thomas said. "Maybe some old tramp living in the woods." "But there was no one there," Jake said. "We would have seen someone with our torches." "And how did they move around so fast?" I added. The sound kept coming from different directions. We sat in silence for a few moments, trying to process what had happened. That's when Mark suddenly stiffened and pointed out through the windshield. "What's that?" he whispered. The lay-by where we'd stopped overlooked a large open field that stretched between the road and the distant edge of the forest we'd just left. The sky was dark now, but not completely black, that deep blue-gray of early evening, and standing in the middle of the field, maybe 100 yards away, was a figure. Even at that distance, in the failing light, I could tell something was wrong with it. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs and torso seemed elongated, out of proportion. It stood perfectly still, facing in our direction. "Is that a person?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. None of us answered. We couldn't. There was something so profoundly wrong about the figure that it seemed to paralyze my thoughts. It was human-shaped, yes, but wrong in ways I couldn't properly articulate. The proportions were off. The stillness was unnatural, and then it moved. It didn't walk, exactly. It's hard to describe. Its limbs moved in ways that human limbs shouldn't, bending at angles that made my stomach turn. But it was moving across the field, toward the forest, not toward us. Yet somehow, despite moving away, it felt like it was getting closer. I couldn't look away. None of us could. We sat there, frozen, watching this thing move across the field with its impossible gait. Then, without warning, it stopped again, and slowly, with a deliberate motion that sent ice through my veins, it turned its head, just its head, a full 180 degrees to face us directly. In the dimming light and at that distance, I couldn't make out any facial features, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was looking at us. I felt it. We all did. Mark started the car so abruptly that we all jumped. He pulled back onto the road and accelerated hard, not looking back. No one protested. No one suggested we go back and investigate. We just wanted to get away. The drive home passed in near silence. None of us knew what to say. What could we say? We'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, and I think we all understood, without needing to discuss it, that telling anyone else would be pointless. Who would believe us? When Mark dropped me and Thomas at our house, we mumbled awkward goodbyes. I remember Jake saying, "See you at school," as if we'd just had a normal evening out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the field, its head turned completely around, facing us while its body faced away. I kept hearing that cracked humming echoing through the trees. The weirdest part came a few weeks later. We'd never discussed what happened again, not properly. It was like an unspoken agreement to pretend it never occurred. But one day, I finally brought it up with Thomas when we were alone. "Hey, do you ever think about what happened in that forest?" I asked him. He looked at me with genuine confusion. "What forest?" "You know, when we went with Mark and Jake, the humming and the thing in the field?" Thomas frowned like he was trying to access a distant memory. "Oh, yeah," he said vaguely. "Something weird happened out there, right? I don't really remember the details." But I could tell from his expression that he wasn't lying. He genuinely didn't remember, or couldn't remember, or wouldn't let himself remember. I never brought it up with Mark or Jake either. Sometimes I wonder if they remember, or if whatever happened that day has been wiped from their minds too. Only I seem to recall it clearly, and sometimes I wish I didn't. I haven't been back to any forest since then. I can't bring myself to go, especially not as daylight begins to fade, because sometimes, when it's quiet and I'm alone, I swear I can still hear that cracked elderly humming, and sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something unnaturally tall moving with that wrong, impossible gait. Story 3. I've always been a bit of an urban explorer, nothing hardcore, just wandering around abandoned places whenever I got the chance. Last summer, my buddy Mike and I were driving through rural Wisconsin, taking the scenic route to his cousin's wedding. We had plenty of time, so we were basically just meandering along these back roads, enjoying being away from the city for a bit. It was around 4 in the afternoon when we spotted this old train depot through a break in the trees. It wasn't visible from the main road. We only saw it because we'd turned onto this gravel side road looking for a place to stretch our legs. The place was literally in the middle of nowhere, like someone had just dropped a building in the middle of the forest and forgotten about it. "Dude, we have to check that out," I said, and Mike agreed. He's usually down for whatever, which is why we're friends. We parked on the side of the dirt road and walked maybe a quarter mile through tall grass to reach the depot. It was this weathered brick building, 2 stories tall, with a partially collapsed roof on one end. Nature was reclaiming it, vines growing up the walls, small trees sprouting from cracks in the foundation. The tracks themselves were still there, but rusted and overgrown, disappearing into the trees in both directions. The front door was hanging off its hinges, and a faded sign above it read Pinewood Station, though there wasn't a town called Pinewood anywhere around there that we knew of. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. "This is awesome," Mike said, already taking photos with his phone. "Let's go inside." I remember hesitating for just a second. Not because I was scared. I'd been in plenty of abandoned buildings before, but because something about this place felt different. Not necessarily bad, just, I don't know, like it was waiting for something. But I shrugged it off and followed Mike inside. The main hall of the depot was surprisingly intact. High ceilings, dirty windows letting in beams of dusty sunlight, old wooden benches lining the walls where passengers would have waited for their trains. The ticket counter was still there, though the glass was long gone. Graffiti covered some of the walls, but not much. Like even vandals didn't come out here often. We walked around taking pictures, checking out the old schedules still posted on the wall. The last date I could make out was from 1976. Poking our heads into the back offices. Nothing too exciting, just the usual abandoned building stuff. Old papers, broken furniture, empty bottles left by the occasional trespasser. It was when we came back into the main waiting hall that things started to get weird. I noticed it first. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like breathing through a wet blanket. At first I thought maybe a storm was rolling in. You know how the air pressure changes. But when I looked out the windows, the sky was still clear. "Is it getting hard to breathe in here?" I asked Mike. He shrugged. "A little stuffy maybe. Probably just dust." But it wasn't just dust. The air felt thick, almost resistant, like it was pushing back against me, and it was getting worse with every breath. That's when I noticed the suitcase. It was sitting on one of the benches against the far wall, an old-fashioned leather suitcase, the kind with straps and buckles instead of zippers. The leather was cracked and peeling, faded to this weird brownish-green color. I swear to God it hadn't been there when we first walked through the main hall. I would have noticed it. "Hey, was that suitcase there before?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mike glanced over. "Huh? Oh, I don't know. Probably. I didn't really look." I started walking toward it, curious. With each step, the air seemed to get heavier, and I started feeling dizzy, kind of lightheaded. Not like I was going to pass out, but like my senses were slightly off kilter. Colors seemed brighter, sounds slightly muffled. And the whole time I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. Not by Mike. He was off investigating some old railroad maps on the wall. No, this feeling was coming from the suitcase. I know how that sounds. It was just a damn suitcase, an inanimate object. But I swear to you, it felt like it was observing me, watching me approach, and not in a neutral way. There was something hostile about it, something that didn't want me there. I stopped about 6 feet away from it. The feeling of being observed was so intense now that the hairs on my arms were standing up. What was weirder was that the feeling seemed to track my movements. When I shifted slightly to the left, the sensation of being watched shifted too, like whatever was watching me was adjusting its gaze. My mouth was dry. "Mike," I called out, not taking my eyes off the suitcase. "Come here for a second." "Check this out," he said instead, still looking at the wall. "This schedule shows trains to towns that don't even exist anymore, like there's no Pinewood on any modern map. Mike, seriously, come here." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he finally turned around and walked over. As soon as he got close, he stopped. "Whoa," he said, his voice quieter. "You feel that? The air?" I asked. "Yeah, and—" He trailed off, looking around the room. "Is it just me, or does it feel like something's watching us?" A chill ran through me. I hadn't said anything about feeling watched. Like, from over there. I nodded toward the suitcase. Mike squinted at it. "Maybe I keep seeing little flickers out of the corner of my eye, like shadows moving when they shouldn't be. Started as soon as we came back into this room." We both stood there, staring at this ordinary-looking suitcase that somehow felt like the most threatening thing I'd ever encountered. I had the strangest urge to open it, to see what was inside, but a much stronger instinct was screaming at me to get the hell away from it. "Let's go," I said suddenly. Mike didn't argue. In fact, he was already backing toward the entrance. "Yeah, this place is giving me the creeps all of a sudden." We turned and walked quickly to the exit, and with each step away from the suitcase, the air seemed to lighten just a bit. But the feeling of being watched didn't diminish. If anything, it intensified, like whatever was observing us was angry we were leaving. Just as we reached the door, there was a loud crack from behind us, like wood splitting. We both jumped and spun around. One of the benches, not the one with the suitcase, but one a few feet away, had a fresh break down the middle, as if something had just snapped it. There was no one else in the room. Nothing had fallen on it. It had just broken. "Nope," Mike said. "Already outside." "Nope, nope, nope." I followed him out, and the second we stepped outside, the air changed. It was like walking from a sauna into air conditioning. The heaviness was just gone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh forest air. We practically jogged back to the car, not saying much. It wasn't until we were driving away that Mike broke the silence. "That was weird as fuck, right? Like, I'm not crazy." "Definitely weird," I agreed, still trying to process what had happened. "That suitcase. What about it?" he asked. "Did you feel like it was watching us?" Mike was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if it was the suitcase specifically, but something in there was aware of us. Something that didn't want us there." We spent the rest of the drive talking about it, trying to rationalize what we'd experienced. Maybe there were gas leaks in the old building causing hallucinations. Maybe the structure was unsound and that's why the bench broke. Maybe our imaginations just got the best of us, but we both knew those explanations didn't quite fit. That night at the motel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that suitcase. It had burned itself into my memory, every crack in the leather, every tarnished buckle, and I kept feeling like I was being watched, even though I was alone in my room with the curtains drawn and the door locked. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off, only to jerk awake an hour later, heart pounding. I'd been dreaming about the depot, but in my dream, I'd opened the suitcase. I couldn't remember what I'd seen inside, just that it had filled me with a terror so profound it had woken me up. The next day, we drove back to Chicago, taking the interstate this time. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but I could tell Mike was as unsettled as I was. As we got farther from that place, the feeling of being watched gradually faded, but never completely went away. It's been almost a year now. I've mostly convinced myself it was just an odd experience, a combination of an eerie location and an overactive imagination. But sometimes, usually when I'm alone at night, I'll get that feeling again, that heavy air, that sense of hostile observation, and I'll think about that suitcase sitting on its bench in an abandoned train station in the middle of nowhere, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, try to figure out what really happened, maybe open the suitcase, see what's inside. But then I remember how the air felt, how that bench snapped for no reason, how even Mike felt it. And I know I never want to set foot in Pinewood Station again. Whatever lives in that place, whatever claimed that old leather suitcase as its own, it doesn't want visitors, and I'm going to respect its wishes. Story 4. I've never been the type to believe in the paranormal. Ghost stories were just that, stories. I'm a rational guy who works in IT, pays taxes, and has a normal life. At least that's what I thought until 3 nights ago when something happened that I still can't explain. It started with what I thought was just a nightmare. I'd fallen asleep watching some mindless YouTube videos around midnight after a long day at work. Nothing unusual there. I often doze off with my laptop still open on my desk, but the dream I had that night, it wasn't like anything I'd experienced before. In this dream, I was watching, not participating, just observing, as some kind of entity moved through the world. It wasn't human, though it could look human when it wanted to. It was something else entirely, something ancient and cruel that fed on fear and death. The thing had a pattern. First, it would select someone, then it would appear to them as someone they knew, but slightly off, just wrong enough to terrify them. Once they were paralyzed with fear, it would take them over, not like in cheesy possession movies with head spinning and projectile vomiting. It was subtle. The person would still seem like themselves, but they weren't in control anymore. Then it would make them walk, always to somewhere isolated, somewhere no one would hear them scream. I watched in my dream as this thing claimed victim after victim. An older man lured to an abandoned mine shaft. A teenage boy led deep into the woods. A middle-aged woman drawn to a boarded-up house on the edge of town. Each time the process was the same. Select, terrify, possess, isolate, kill. The last victim I saw was a woman with wavy blonde hair and these striking blue eyes. She couldn't have been more than 5'4". She was wearing a denim jacket over a black shirt and jeans. There was something about her that felt so specific, so real, not like a dream character at all. After taking her over, the entity made her walk to this massive abandoned factory on the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize. The building was a hulking concrete monstrosity, with broken windows and graffiti covering most of the lower walls. The woman wasn't alone at first. There were people following her, friends maybe, who sensed something was wrong. The entity used her body to lead them deeper and deeper into the building. One by one, it picked them off. Some it scared away with visions that I couldn't see but could tell were horrifying from their reactions. Others it actually killed, making the woman watch, trapped inside her own body. Eventually, she was alone, deep in the building's basement level. The concrete walls were stained with water damage and mold. Pipes hung from the ceiling, dripping steadily. The air felt thick and damp. The woman ended up in a room with what looked like an old elevator shaft, just a vertical concrete hole in the floor about 6 feet across. The cover or gate that should have been there was long gone. Then came the worst part. The entity stepped out of her body and created a perfect duplicate of her standing on the other side of the room. The real woman, now free but terrified beyond reason, backed away from her doppelganger. I could feel her terror as if it were my own. The cold sweat, the racing heart, the tightening in her chest that made it hard to breathe. The copy walked toward her slowly, its movements just slightly wrong, like watching someone try to imitate human movement without fully understanding it. The woman kept backing up until, God, I can still see it happening. Her heel hit the edge of the open shaft. She windmilled her arms, trying to regain her balance, but it was too late. She fell backward into the hole. It wasn't a fatal drop, maybe 9 or 10 feet down. I could see her at the bottom, dazed but alive, looking up at the circle of light above her. The walls of the shaft were smooth concrete. There was no way to climb out. The entity, still wearing her face, peered down at her and smiled. Not a normal smile, too wide, too many teeth. It said something I couldn't hear clearly, then turned and walked away, leaving her there. The dream shifted, and I could see her days later, still in that hole. No food, no water, no hope of rescue, screaming until her voice gave out. Nobody could hear her. Nobody was coming. The factory was too isolated, too forgotten. I woke up gasping for air I checked my phone immediately. 5:17 in the morning. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was drenched in sweat, my sheets twisted around me like I'd been thrashing in my sleep. It took me a few seconds to orient myself. I was in my bedroom. My desk with my computer was about 3 feet from my bed. The blinds were closed, but I could see it was still dark outside. My breathing was loud in the quiet room, ragged, panicked breaths that I was struggling to control. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one breathing. There was another set of breaths in the room, matching mine exactly, but louder, deeper. It was coming from the empty space between my bed and my desk. I froze. The breathing continued, synced with mine, but definitely not mine. I tried to hold my breath to confirm I wasn't imagining things. When I did, the other breathing continued for a second, then stopped too. As soon as I had to gasp for air, the other breathing resumed, matching me again. I lay there, utterly terrified, for what felt like an eternity but was probably about 20 seconds. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps on the carpet where nothing visible was walking. They moved away from me, toward my bedroom door. My door was closed and locked, old habit from growing up with nosy siblings. But the footsteps paused there. I heard the distinct sound of my doorknob turning. The lock clicked. The door opened, though I couldn't see anyone there. The footsteps continued into the hallway, heading toward the kitchen. I don't know what possessed me, maybe adrenaline overriding my fear. But I got up. I went to my door, which was now standing open about 6 inches. I pushed it all the way open and looked out into the hall. Nothing. The house was silent now. No breathing, no footsteps, just the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the central air. I grabbed my phone as a flashlight and searched the entire house. My dad was still asleep in his room, undisturbed. All the doors and windows were locked. Nothing was out of place. Nothing indicated anyone or anything had been moving through our house, but I had heard it. I know what I heard. I spent the rest of that night sitting up in bed, back against the wall, watching my door. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, convinced I heard that breathing again. When morning finally came, I felt sick with exhaustion. My dad got up for work like normal and asked if I was feeling okay. I must have looked as bad as I felt. I told him I'd had a nightmare and couldn't get back to sleep. He nodded sympathetically but didn't ask for details, which was a relief. How could I explain what happened? I've spent the last 3 days researching, looking up demons, entities, dream phenomena, anything that might explain what I experienced. I haven't found anything conclusive, nothing that perfectly matches what happened. The woman from my dream haunts me. She seemed so real, so specific. I've been checking missing persons reports, though I don't even know what city or state I should be looking at. So far, I haven't found anyone matching her description. I haven't heard the breathing again, haven't noticed any doors opening on their own or footsteps where no one is walking, but I still don't feel alone in my room at night. I keep thinking about the pattern from my dream: select, terrify, possess, isolate, kill. If that thing was real, if what I experienced wasn't just some bizarre waking nightmare or sleep paralysis episode, then I'm afraid it selected me that night. The breathing was its way of letting me know it's real, that the nightmare wasn't just a nightmare. I'm terrified of falling asleep now. I've been taking caffeine pills and energy drinks to stay awake as long as possible. When I do crash, I leave all the lights on and my door wide open. I've set up my phone to record while I sleep, but so far, it hasn't captured anything unusual. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone without sounding completely insane. My dad would think I was on drugs or having some kind of breakdown. My friends would laugh it off as me watching too many horror movies. But I know what I experienced was real. That breathing was real. Those footsteps were real. That thing from my nightmare somehow reached out into our world, if only for a few moments. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not done with me yet. That one night soon I'll wake up to that synchronized breathing again, and this time, maybe I'll see what's making it, or worse. Maybe I'll become like that woman in the factory, walking but not in control, leading others to their doom before meeting my own end in some forgotten place where no one will ever find me. I just needed to tell someone, to create some record of what happened in case I'm not around to tell it later. If you've experienced anything like this, please let me know. I need to understand what this thing is and how to protect myself from it. Because I'm afraid the next time I dream about it, I won't wake up at all. Story 5. I still don't know how to explain what happened that night at my grandmother's farm. It's been 3 weeks, and I keep replaying it in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've barely slept since then. It was the second weekend of October, and 5 of us had gathered at my grandmother's old farm in Redbrook. The place has been in our family for generations, and while Grandma moved to a retirement community last year, we still use the farmhouse occasionally for get-togethers. That evening, it was me, Marcus, my cousin Lily, her boyfriend Chris, and our friends Jake and Damien. The farm sits about 20 minutes outside town, surrounded by cornfields and woods. There's something peaceful about it in autumn. The way the golden light hits the weathered red barn, the smell of fallen leaves, the quiet that settles over everything as the sun goes down. We had spent the afternoon drinking beers, playing card games on the wide front porch, and cooking burgers on the old grill. As night fell, the temperature dropped quickly. The porch light attracted moths and other insects, and we could hear owls calling from the tree line. Around 9:30, we decided to pack up and head back to town. We'd all driven separately except for Lily and Chris, who had come together. We were gathering our stuff, empty beer cans, paper plates, leftover chips, when Jake crumpled up some trash and asked, "Where should I put this?" I pointed toward the barn about 50 yards from the house. "Just toss it in the big trash can inside the barn. We'll take it to the curb tomorrow." Jake nodded and grabbed some more of our garbage. "I'll take care of it." I watched him walk away from the porch light, his silhouette becoming less distinct as he moved toward the barn. The floodlight on the barn's exterior was burned out, something I'd been meaning to replace for weeks. For some reason, maybe because I was slightly buzzed or just bored, I decided to follow him. I told the others I was going to help Jake with the trash. The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked the path to the barn. Jake was about 15 yards ahead of me. I could see his outline against the darkness, moving steadily toward the barn. When he reached the door, he turned around and looked at me. Even in the darkness, I could see his smile. And that's where things first felt wrong. Jake isn't the smiling type. He's more the sarcastic smirk kind of guy. But this wasn't a smirk. It was a wide, toothy grin that spread across his entire face. Something about it seemed off, like his face was stretched too far. But I brushed it off. We'd been drinking after all. He slipped inside the barn, and I continued walking toward it. The barn is old but solid, with large wooden sliding doors at the front. One of them was partially open now, where Jake had just entered. When I reached the barn, I did something stupid, a childish prank. I slid the door almost closed and moved the wooden latch halfway into place, not fully locking it but making it seem like I had. I expected Jake to immediately push against the door, curse at me, and demand I open it. It was the kind of dumb thing we'd been doing to each other since high school. But nothing happened. No sound came from inside. "Jake?" I called, not too loudly. I was still playing along with my own joke. "Nothing. Very funny," I said, a little louder. "Come on, man." Still nothing. No shuffling, no laughing, no sounds of movement, just silence. I stood there for maybe a minute, waiting for him to react. Then I heard Lily laugh from the direction of the porch. I turned and saw her watching us, probably expecting some kind of prank war to unfold. She cupped her hands around her mouth and yelled, "What are you guys doing?" I shrugged and turned back to the barn. By this point, about 3 minutes had passed with complete silence from inside. It wasn't like Jake to be this patient with a joke. I started to feel uneasy. "Jake, seriously. You okay in there?" I called out. When there was still no response, I slid the latch back and pulled the barn door open wider. The interior was pitch black. The barn has no electricity. We just use it for storage these days. Old farm equipment, holiday decorations, that kind of stuff. "Jake?" I called again, my voice echoing slightly in the open space. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the barn's interior. The light caught dust particles floating in the air and illuminated the familiar contents. My grandfather's old tractor in the corner, stacks of plastic bins against one wall, some gardening tools hanging from hooks. The center of the barn was mostly empty, just a dirt floor with scattered hay, but no Jake. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam darting around the space. "Jake, this isn't funny anymore. Where are you hiding?" The barn isn't that big, maybe 40 feet by 30 feet, with no real hiding spots except behind the tractor or some of the storage boxes. I checked behind everything, feeling increasingly confused and, if I'm being honest, a little scared. There was simply nowhere a person could hide without me seeing them. The barn has no other exits except for a small window about 7 feet up on the back wall, but it's painted shut. Has been for as long as I can remember. No way Jake could have slipped out that way, especially not silently and in the dark. I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, and Lily appeared in the doorway, her own phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. "What's taking so long?" she asked, then noticed my expression. "Where's Jake?" "I don't know," I said, and explained what had happened, how I'd followed him to the barn, seen him go inside, and then found it empty. Lily looked skeptical, but helped me search the barn again. We checked every possible hiding spot, even looking up at the hayloft, which was mostly empty except for a few old crates. We called Jake's name repeatedly, our voices sounding strangely hollow in the empty space. "This doesn't make any sense," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "I watched him walk in here. I saw him." Lily shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe he went around the side while you weren't looking. Let's go back to the house." As we walked back, I kept turning around to look at the barn, half expecting to see Jake emerge, laughing at his successful prank. But the barn remained dark and silent. When we reached the porch, I stopped dead in my tracks. Jake was sitting on the steps, bent over, tying his shoelace. Chris and Damien were standing nearby, looking ready to leave. "What the hell?" I said, loud enough that everyone turned to look at me. Jake straightened up. "What? Where were you?" I demanded. "How did you get back here?" He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? I've been right here." "No, you were. I followed you to the barn," I insisted. "You went inside with the trash." Jake shook his head. "Dude, I never went to the barn. I was about to take the trash out when Chris said he'd just put it all in his truck and dump it at his place." I looked at Chris, who nodded. "Yeah, we bagged it all up. It's in my truck bed." "But I saw you," I said to Jake, my voice rising slightly. "I literally watched you walk to the barn and go inside. I even closed the door partway as a joke." Jake held up his hands. "Man, I don't know what to tell you. I never left the porch. Ask anyone." I looked at Damien and Chris, who both nodded in agreement. "He's been here the whole time," Damien confirmed. "You and Lily were the ones who went to the barn." I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest. "Lily, tell them. You saw the empty barn. Jake wasn't in there." Lily looked uncomfortable. "The barn was empty, yeah, but I didn't see Jake go in. I only saw you walking to the barn, then standing there for a few minutes before going inside." My mind was racing. This made no sense. I was absolutely certain I had followed Jake to the barn. I had seen him turn and smile at me, that weird, too-wide smile that had seemed off even in the moment. "Then who did I follow?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nobody answered. Jake looked concerned now rather than confused. "Maybe you saw a shadow or something? It's pretty dark out there." But it wasn't a shadow. It was a person, Jake's height and build, wearing Jake's clothes, moving with purpose toward the barn, and that smile. We left shortly after that. The drive back to town was a blur. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had I somehow mistaken someone else for Jake? But there was no one else. It could have been. I've gone back to the farm twice since then in daylight and thoroughly searched the barn. There are no hidden trapdoors, no secret passages, nowhere someone could have disappeared to. The window is still painted shut, with cobwebs across it that haven't been disturbed in years. I've asked everyone again and again about that night. Their stories never change. Jake never left the porch. Only Lily and I went to the barn, and it was empty when we got there. But I know what I saw. I saw someone, or something, that looked exactly like Jake walk into that barn. I saw it turn and smile at me with a grin that was just slightly wrong, too wide and too eager, and then it vanished into thin air. The part that keeps me up at night isn't just the impossibility of what happened. It's the question of intent. Why lead me to an empty barn? What would have happened if Lily hadn't come looking for us? Was I meant to follow whatever it was I saw? And if so, for what purpose? And most disturbing of all, if it wasn't Jake I followed to the barn that night, then whose face smiled at me in the darkness? Because the more I think about it, the more I realize that smile didn't just look wrong because it was too wide. It looked wrong because it wasn't Jake's face at all. It was something else entirely, something wearing a poor imitation of my friend's features, like an ill-fitting mask. I haven't been back to the farm at night since then. I'm not sure I ever will be. Story 6. I never believed in ghosts until last spring. It's hard to even type this out now, but I need to share what happened to me. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can explain what I saw that night. I'm a security guard at Riverside Academy, this old boarding school in Massachusetts that's been around since like the 1800s. It's one of those fancy prep schools with stone buildings, ivy-covered walls, and rich kids whose parents pay more for a year of tuition than I make in 5 years. When COVID hit last March, they sent all the students home and basically shut the whole campus down except for essential staff. I was 24 at the time and had been working security there for about 2 years. Not a bad gig normally, just walking around, checking doors, watching cameras. But when everyone left, the place got different. The campus is huge. 8 dorms, a chapel that looks like something from a horror movie, this massive library, administrative buildings, classroom buildings, a boathouse down by the river, and an arts center. All of it suddenly empty. Just me, alone, for 12-hour night shifts. At first, I kinda liked it. I could chill in the security office, watch Netflix, and only had to do rounds every couple hours. But after a few weeks, the emptiness started getting to me. The silence felt wrong. Buildings that were normally full of teenagers laughing and shouting were just dead. It was a Tuesday night in April when it happened. I remember because I had just started my 3-day rotation, and Tuesdays were always the slowest. Around 10 at night, I started my second round of checks. The sky was completely black. No moon, just a few stars visible through the clouds. The wind was blowing hard enough to make the old windows rattle. Spring in New England, 40 degrees and miserable. I started with the dorms, all locked up tight. The dining hall was fine, the library was fine. Then I got to the main academic building, this massive 4-story stone monster they call Old Main. It's the original school building from 1870-something, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors, narrow staircases, and classrooms with those old-fashioned desks bolted to the floor. I unlocked the main entrance and stepped inside, flicking on my flashlight. I never turned on all the lights during rounds. Just seemed like a waste of electricity. Plus, I knew the buildings like the back of my hand by then. The first floor was fine, quiet and cold. I checked all the classroom doors, making sure they were locked, sweeping my light across each room to make sure nothing was disturbed. Normal routine. I was halfway down the first floor hallway when I heard it. Footsteps, running footsteps on the floor above me. At first I froze, thinking maybe someone had broken in, but it wasn't just normal footsteps. It was like a sprint, someone running full speed down the hallway directly above me. The old wooden floors creaked and groaned under the weight. "Hey!" I shouted, immediately regretting it. If it was an intruder, I had just announced my position, but the footsteps continued, uninterrupted, racing from one end of the second floor to the other. I pulled out my radio. Base, this is Holloway. I think we have an intruder in Old Main, second floor, but I got no response, just static. Weird, because my radio had been working fine all night. I headed for the staircase, heart pounding. The footsteps had stopped by then. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on my flashlight, the other on my radio. The stairwell was narrow, the steps worn in the middle from a century and a half of students. When I reached the second floor, I swept my flashlight down both directions of the hallway. Nothing, empty. Not a single sign that anyone had been there. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the walls. "Security, if someone's here, come out now." Nothing. I walked the entire second floor, checking every classroom. All the doors were still locked. The windows were all secured. There was absolutely no way anyone could have been running up here, and yet I'd heard it clear as day. I convinced myself it must have been the wind somehow, or the old building settling. I finished checking the second floor and headed to the third. That's when my flashlight flickered, just once, but enough to make me pause. I smacked it against my palm, and it seemed to stabilize. The third floor was used mainly for language classes and had this weird layout where some of the rooms connected to each other. I checked each room methodically, trying to ignore the growing uneasiness in my stomach. As I was leaving Old Main, my radio suddenly crackled to life. "Marcus, you there?" It was Joe from the security office. "Yeah, I'm here. Did you get my call about Old Main?" "What call? Haven't heard anything from you for the past 30 minutes. I didn't know how to respond to that. I was certain I'd called in, but I let it go and headed to my next stop, the Arts Center. The Arts Center was newer than most buildings on campus, built in the 80s. It had a theater, music rooms, art studios, and dance spaces. I always hated doing rounds there because the layout was confusing and there were too many places someone could hide. I entered through the side door near the ceramics studio. The building was pitch black inside, and the air smelled like clay and paint thinner. I started checking rooms one by one. When I got to the theater, I heard voices. Not footsteps this time, actual voices. Two people talking, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like they were having a conversation, not arguing, not whispering, just talking normally. The voices were coming from the stage area. I moved cautiously down the aisle between the seats, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. "Hello, security," I called out. The voices stopped immediately. I reached the stage and climbed the small set of stairs on the side. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing empty space. No people, no movement. Just dusty curtains and props from a play that never happened because of the pandemic. That's when I heard a door slam somewhere backstage, loud, like someone had put their whole body into it. The sound echoed through the empty theater. I rushed backstage, adrenaline pumping. The backstage area was a maze of small rooms, dressing rooms, storage closets, a green room. I checked each one, finding nothing out of place and no doors that looked like they'd been recently opened or closed. In the last dressing room, something caught my eye. This room had a wall of mirrors with those old-fashioned light bulbs around them. As I swept my flashlight across them, I saw movement in one of the reflections. I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw it. A face, blue-tinged, shorter than my reflection. The face looked like it was struggling to breathe, mouth open, eyes wide with panic. It was right behind my reflection, but nothing was behind me in the actual room. I'll never forget those eyes, bloodshot, desperate. The whole face had this wet, bloated quality to it, and the blue color wasn't like makeup or paint. It was the blue of someone who couldn't breathe. I dropped my flashlight. It clattered on the floor, spinning and creating wild shadows. When I managed to grab it and look back at the mirror, the face was gone. I got the hell out of there. I ran through the theater, out the side door, and didn't stop until I reached the security office. Joe took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, shaking. The next morning, I told my supervisor, Derek, what happened. He's this older British guy who's been at the school forever. I expected him to laugh it off or tell me I was sleep deprived. Instead, he got really quiet and asked me to describe exactly what I'd seen. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You're not the first," he said. "I saw something in Old Main myself about 15 years ago. Different from what you saw, but not natural." Then he told me about the history of the school. Apparently, back in 1907, two boys who attended the academy were playing on a homemade raft in the river near the boathouse. One fell in and started drowning. The other tried to save him, but couldn't. The drowning boy's body wasn't found for 3 days. "His name was Thomas Aldridge," Derek said, 12 years old. His friend said that when he pulled him up briefly, Thomas's face was blue, and he was gasping for air before he slipped under again. I felt sick. "You think that's what I saw? This kid who drowned over 100 years ago?" Derek shrugged. "I don't know what you saw, Marcus, but there are parts of this campus where the past doesn't stay buried. Especially now, with everyone gone, it's like the place remembers when it's empty." I wanted to quit right then, but jobs were scarce with the pandemic and I needed the money, so I stayed, but I started doing my rounds differently. I'd turn on all the lights, I'd play music or podcasts on my phone while walking. I never went into any building alone if I could help it. But even with those precautions, weird things kept happening. My radio would cut out in certain buildings. I'd hear doors opening and closing when I knew they should be locked. Once, I swear someone called my name while I was checking the chapel. The worst part is, I started having dreams about that blue face. In my dreams, I could hear what it was trying to say. It always said the same thing. "Help me." Over and over, "Help me, help me." It's been over a year now, and I still work at the academy. Students are back, and the campus feels normal again most of the time. But there are moments, especially late at night when the students are asleep, when I'll be walking past the Arts Center or Old Main, and I'll get this feeling like someone's watching me. I've never seen the blue face again, but sometimes when I walk past the river, I think I hear splashing, like someone struggling in the water. When I look, there's never anything there, just ripples spreading across the surface, as if something had just gone under. Story 7. I've never told anyone outside my family about this, but it's been years now and I still think about it all the time. This happened when I was 13, back in 2008, during my first deer hunting trip in central Pennsylvania. My dad finally decided I was old enough to join the family hunting tradition that year. I'd been begging to go since I was like 9, watching my cousin Matt, who's 3 years older than me, get to go while I had to stay home. The trip was always to this old hunting cabin my great-grandpa built with his brothers sometime in the 70s. It's super remote, like several miles from the nearest neighbors, right up against state forest land. Dad kept telling me for weeks before that this was a no video games, no complaining kind of trip. I was so excited I didn't even care. The drive out there took almost 3 hours from our house. We picked up my Uncle Dave on the way and Matt was already there with his dad. The cabin is pretty basic, just a small kitchen area with a table, a tiny living room with 2 couches, and 2 small bedrooms down a short hallway. There's no running water in winter because they drain the pipes, so you have to use an outhouse that's maybe 30 feet from the back door. The place has this really specific smell, like wood smoke, gun oil, and that musty cabin smell all mixed together. We got there Friday afternoon and I couldn't sleep that night because I was so pumped for the morning hunt. Dad had been teaching me to shoot for the past year and I'd practiced a ton with the .243 rifle he got me for my birthday. It's smaller than an adult rifle but still good enough to take down a deer. Saturday morning we all got up before dawn. It was freaking freezing, like 20 degrees with this biting wind. We bundled up in all our orange gear and camo, and Dad took me to this spot about a mile from the cabin, where he said he'd shot his first deer when he was a kid. We were in one of those 2-person tree stands, just sitting there for hours while the sun came up. I remember my toes going numb, even through my thick socks and boots. Then around 9 in the morning, this young buck came walking through. Dad nudged me and whispered to get ready. My hands were shaking so bad, partly from cold and partly from excitement. The deer stopped in this perfect spot, and I lined up the shot just like I'd practiced. When I pulled the trigger, I remember being surprised that I actually hit it. The deer jumped, ran about 20 yards, and collapsed. Dad checked his watch and said it was exactly 9:09 a.m. when I took the shot. I remember that specifically because he made a big deal about it, saying I should remember the exact time I got my first deer. We waited the half hour you're supposed to before approaching it, to make sure it's dead and doesn't suffer, and then Dad showed me how to gut it. That part was pretty gross, but also kind of fascinating in a weird way. My hands were covered in blood up to my wrists, and it was still warm despite the cold air. It took both of us to drag the deer back to the cabin. Everyone made a big deal about it being my first deer, taking pictures and stuff. I felt really proud. We hung it up on this meat pole they have outside the cabin to drain and cool down. We went out again in the afternoon, but nobody got anything else. That night, after a dinner of venison steaks from a deer Matt had gotten earlier in the season, we played cards and told stories around the wood stove. The cabin has no TV or anything, just an old radio that mostly picks up static. Uncle Dave told these hunting stories that I'm pretty sure were mostly made up, but they were still fun to listen to. When it was time for bed, Dad and Matt took the 2 bedrooms, and Uncle Dave and I slept on the couches in the living room. The living room is right off the kitchen, so from my couch I could see the front door and most of the kitchen table. Uncle Dave always snores really loud, like chainsaw loud, but I was so tired I fell asleep anyway. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. At first I wasn't sure what woke me, but then I heard the front door finish closing with that specific creak and thud it makes. I figured it was probably Dad or Matt going out to use the outhouse. I was going to just roll over and go back to sleep, but then I heard footsteps. They sounded weird, like heavier than normal, but also kind of soft at the same time. It's hard to describe. They moved from the door around the kitchen table and then stopped a few yards behind where my head was on the couch. I realized suddenly that Uncle Dave wasn't snoring anymore. The cabin was completely silent except for the occasional pop from the dying embers in the wood stove. Something felt really wrong. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? It was like that, but all over my body. I turned around to look, thinking it was just Dad checking on me or something. What I saw instead is something I'll never forget for as long as I live. Standing there between the kitchen table and my couch was this figure. It was tall, way taller than my dad, who's 6 foot, maybe 7 feet tall or even more, and it had to slightly duck its head under the ceiling beams. It was wearing a white puffy coat, like a winter puffer jacket, but the rest of it was just black, not like a black person or someone wearing black clothes. It was like a hole in reality, darker than the darkness around it. It didn't have any features that I could see. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just this jet black silhouette shaped vaguely like a person but wrong somehow. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't even breathe. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I just laid there, staring at this thing for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds. The thing didn't move toward me or anything, it just stood there like it was, I don't know, watching me. Can something without eyes watch you? It felt like it was. Then it turned. Not like a person turns, but more like it just reoriented itself and walked toward the hallway where the bedrooms were. It moved in this smooth, gliding way that didn't look natural. As it went down the hallway, I lost sight of it, but I didn't hear any doors open or close. For at least 5 minutes after it disappeared, I just lay there, completely frozen. I noticed that Uncle Dave still wasn't snoring, which was super weird because he always snores. It wasn't until a bit later that his snoring started up again, like nothing had happened. I grabbed my phone from the floor next to the couch to check the time. It was exactly 2:29 a.m. I remember thinking how weird it was that I woke up at such a specific time, just like I'd shot the deer at a specific time. I wanted to wake up Uncle Dave so bad, but I was too scared to make a sound. Eventually, around 3:30, Uncle Dave got up to put more wood in the stove. Only then did I feel safe enough to close my eyes again, but I didn't really sleep. I just kind of drifted in and out until morning came. At breakfast, I was exhausted and jumpy. I kept looking at everyone, trying to figure out if they'd seen anything or if one of them had been walking around in the night, but they were all just normal, talking about where we should hunt that day. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and asked if anyone had gone to the outhouse around 2 a.m. They all said no. Dad said he'd slept straight through, and Matt said the same. Uncle Dave said he only got up once to put wood in the stove, but that was later. When I told them what I'd seen, they all kind of looked at each other. Dad suggested I'd had a nightmare brought on by the excitement of the hunt and all the new experiences. Matt laughed and said I'd probably seen a ghost of some hunter who died in the woods. Uncle Dave just kind of grunted and said sometimes the woods play tricks on your mind, but I know what I saw wasn't a dream. You know how dreams fade when you wake up? This hasn't faded at all. I remember every single detail about that figure, how unnaturally tall it was, how it moved, the way its black skin seemed to absorb the light around it, the stark white of that puffer jacket. And I remember how, when it was in the room, Uncle Dave's snoring stopped, like he was holding his breath too, even though he was asleep. We finished out the hunting trip the next day, and I didn't see the figure again. I've been back to the cabin several times since then, but nothing like that has ever happened again. I've researched local legends and ghost stories from the area, but never found anything that matches what I saw. I'm 27 now, and I still think about that night all the time. What was that thing? Why did it come inside? Did it go into my dad's room or Matt's? Did they see it too, but just didn't want to talk about it? And why did it show itself to me? The only thing I know for sure is that something was in that cabin with us that night. Something that didn't belong there. Something that wasn't human. And sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I can't help but wonder if it's somewhere nearby, watching me with that featureless black face. Story 8. I've never told anyone about what happened that night at my grandmother's house. I mean, I've tried to explain it to myself a million times, but I always end up with the same conclusion. What I saw wasn't normal. It wasn't just a shadow, and it definitely wasn't my imagination. I know what I saw, even though I wish I didn't. This happened about 3 years ago. My grandmother had passed away 6 months earlier, and I decided to move into her house in Maplewood. It's this small coastal town where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever really happens. The kind of place where the most exciting news is when someone gets a new car or when the local diner changes their menu. I loved that about it. The peacefulness, you know? Grandma's house was this old 2-story place about half a mile from the beach. You could hear the waves crashing if the wind was blowing in the right direction. It was built in the 1940s with those creaky wooden floors and weird little nooks and crannies that old houses always seem to have. I'd spent so many summers there as a kid that it felt more like home than anywhere else I'd lived. The night it happened was completely ordinary. It was late October, and the weather had just started to turn cold. I remember because I'd finally dug out my winter blankets from the hall closet earlier that day. I'd spent most of the evening going through some of Grandma's old photo albums in the living room. Nothing spooky or weird, just normal, boring stuff. Around 11:30, I decided to head to bed. I was tired, but not exhausted, just your average kind of sleepy. I turned off the TV, checked that the front door was locked, and headed upstairs. This is where I need to explain the layout a bit. At the top of the stairs, there's a small landing with a window overlooking the front yard. To the left is the master bedroom, where I was sleeping, and to the right is a hallway leading to the bathroom and 2 smaller bedrooms. I remember pausing at the top of the stairs to look out the window. It was a clear night, and the moonlight was casting these long shadows across the lawn. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just taking in how peaceful everything looked. Then I turned to go into my bedroom. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway to my right, near the door of the guest bedroom, was a shadow, except it wasn't a shadow like you'd normally think of. It wasn't flat against the wall or the floor. It was standing there, like 3-dimensional, solid. A human-shaped figure made entirely of darkness. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I froze completely, not even daring to breathe. But then I realized that what I was looking at couldn't be a person. It was too dark. not like someone wearing black clothes. It was like a piece of the night itself had been cut out and shaped into a human form. It absorbed all the light around it. There was no texture, no clothing, no features, just absolute blackness in the shape of a person, and it was moving, not walking or anything, but its arm, or what I thought was its arm, shifted slowly, deliberately, like it was reaching for the doorknob of the guest bedroom. The movement was smooth, not jerky like you'd expect from a shadow created by something moving in front of a light source. This thing was moving independently. The worst part was the silence, complete and total silence. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustle of clothing, nothing to indicate there was anything actually there. But I could see it, as clearly as I'm seeing this screen right now as I type this. I don't know how long I stood there watching it, maybe 10 seconds, 30. Time felt wrong. I was terrified, but also fascinated. I know that sounds crazy. Who the hell gets fascinated by a shadow person in their hallway? But there was something about it that kept me from immediately running or screaming. Then it turned, not its whole body, just its head. It turned toward me, and even though it had no eyes, no face at all, I felt it looking at me. I felt it become aware of me. That's when the paralysis broke. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to run, but where would I go? This was happening inside my house, my safe place. The shadow figure didn't move toward me. It just stood there, looking at me for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, with the same deliberate slowness, it turned away from me. Its arm completed the motion it had been making, and then, I swear this is true, it passed through the closed door of the guest bedroom. Not like it opened the door and walked through. It literally passed through the solid wooden door, like the door wasn't even there, and then it was gone. I stood there for what must have been 5 minutes, unable to move. I kept waiting for it to come back out, or for something worse to happen. But nothing did. The hallway was empty, just normal shadows cast by the nightlight I always kept plugged in at the far end. Eventually, I managed to force myself to move. I ran into my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and pushed my dresser in front of it. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone. The police? What would I even say? "Hello, officer, there's a shadow in my house." They'd think I was drunk or crazy. I ended up sitting on my bed with all the lights on until morning came, jumping at every little creak and groan of the old house settling. I didn't sleep at all. How could I? When the sun finally came up, I felt a little braver. I moved the dresser, opened my door, and checked the entire house, every room, every closet, under every bed. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was missing. There was no sign that anything had been in my house besides me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird play of shadows from a passing car, but there hadn't been any cars. The house sits back from the road, and I would have seen headlights through the front window. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, and my eyes played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a hallucination or a dream. The guest bedroom seemed normal too. It was just as I'd left it, a bit dusty, with boxes of Grandma's things I still hadn't sorted through. But standing in that room gave me the creeps in a way it never had before, like the room remembered what had happened, even if there was no physical evidence. I called my friend Melissa later that day and tried to explain what I'd seen. She suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, which actually scared me for a different reason. I immediately called someone to check the detectors in the house, but they were all working fine. No carbon monoxide, no gas leaks, nothing that could explain what I saw. I almost moved out that day. I packed a bag and was ready to go to a hotel, but something stopped me. This was my grandmother's house, our family home. Was I really going to let one unexplainable thing drive me away? So I stayed. I slept with the lights on for a week. I put night lights in every hallway and room. I even set up a cheap security camera pointing down that hallway, checking the footage obsessively every morning. Nothing ever showed up on the camera. Nothing ever happened again. At least, nothing as obvious as what I saw that night. But things changed after that. The house felt different. Sometimes I'd be sitting in the living room and get the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I'd spin around, heart racing, but there would be nothing there. Or I'd be in the kitchen and catch what looked like movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find an empty doorway. About a month after the incident, I was going through some of those boxes in the guest bedroom. I found an old journal of my grandmother's from when she was in her 30s. I started reading it, not really expecting to find anything related to what I'd experienced. But there was an entry from April 12, 1978, that made my blood run cold. She wrote about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing what she described as a person made of darkness standing at the foot of her bed. She wrote that it seemed to be looking at her, but then it turned and walked through her closed bedroom door. She mentioned being terrified, but also feeling like it hadn't meant her any harm. It was just there, existing, going about its business. She never mentioned it again in any other entries, just that one time. Just like I only saw it once. I still live in that house. I've made peace with the fact that there's something else there with me, something I don't understand and probably never will. It hasn't shown itself to me again, at least not in the same way. But sometimes, when I'm standing at the top of the stairs looking out that window, I get the distinct impression that someone, or something, is standing right behind me, looking out the window too. I don't turn around anymore when I get that feeling. I'm not sure I want to see what might be there. And the weird thing is, I'm not even that scared of it now. It's like, it's just part of the house. Maybe it always has been. Maybe it always will be. I still wonder what it was doing that night. Where was it going? What was it reaching for? Does it live in the walls or the spaces between rooms? Is it always there and I just happened to catch a glimpse of it? Did my grandmother see it more times than she wrote about? I'll probably never know. But I know what I saw that night wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just my imagination. It was something else entirely, something that exists alongside us, but separate from us. And sometimes, if the conditions are just right, the barriers between our world and whatever world it inhabits get thin enough that we can see each other. And that's the scariest thought of all. Story 9. I still haven't fully processed what happened that summer in Indian Canyon. It's been 18 years, but some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it. I worked for a wilderness therapy program in Utah back in 2005. For those who don't know what that is, we'd take troubled teens out into the wilderness for weeks at a time to help them work through their issues away from the distractions of modern life. It was rewarding work. But what happened during that particular week in July still haunts me. My name's Daniel. I was 27 at the time and had been with the program for about 3 years. My wife Jessica was also on staff, leading a training group for new hires about a mile upstream from where I was stationed. I was serving as the emergency response for several therapy groups in the area, which basically meant I was on call if anything went wrong. The teens were with their assigned counselors, and since nothing was happening that particular day, I had some free time. I'd been wanting to build a proper sweat lodge for staff use for a while. We were in Indian Canyon, south of Dugway, beautiful remote country with red rock formations and scattered juniper trees. I'd spotted this perfect location earlier in the week, a small sandbar near a creek, flat and sandy, with plenty of willows nearby for building materials. It was far enough from Jessica's training group that we wouldn't disturb them, but close enough that staff could easily access it during their downtime. I hiked down to the spot early that morning, maybe around 7. The air was still cool, but I knew it would heat up fast. Had my backpack with some tools, water, and a few tarps. I remember feeling excited about the project. I'd built sweat lodges before and participated in ceremonies with some of our native staff members who had taught me the respectful way to construct and use them. I started harvesting willow saplings for the frame, bending them into a dome shape and securing them with natural cordage. It took me about 2 hours to get the basic structure up. That's when I first felt it, that sensation of being watched. I glanced around, thinking maybe one of the staff had wandered over, but there was nobody. Just the sound of the creek bubbling over rocks and birds calling in the distance. I shrugged it off and continued working, covering the dome with hides, tarps, and some plastic sheeting I'd brought. Inside, I spread sage and juniper branches over the sand to create a fragrant floor. The whole time, that feeling persisted. It wasn't just the normal someone's watching sensation you get sometimes in the wilderness. This felt different, focused. By midday, I'd finished the structure and started gathering smooth lava rocks from a nearby outcropping. These would be heated in the fire and brought into the lodge to create steam. I collected about 15 good-sized ones, arranging them in a pile near where I'd build the fire pit. I needed more, so I walked further down the creek, maybe 50 yards or so. When I returned with 3 more rocks, something odd had happened. The heaviest rock, one that must have weighed at least 15 pounds, was missing from my pile. I spotted it at the edge of the creek, partially submerged. Now I know rocks don't just move themselves, and this particular one was too heavy to have been shifted by an animal. What was stranger was that there were no footprints in the sand besides my own. The sandbar had this fine, almost powder-like sand that showed every impression, but there was nothing, no tracks leading to or from the rock. I remember standing there for a long time, just staring at that rock, trying to make sense of it. I finally retrieved it, set it back with the others, and went back to gathering more. But that uneasy feeling had intensified. It wasn't just being watched anymore, it felt hostile, like whatever was observing me was angry about my presence or what I was doing. By late afternoon, I had everything ready. I dug a fire pit, arranged the rocks, and collected firewood. The sun was starting to dip behind the canyon walls, creating long shadows. That's when I saw movement through the trees, someone running toward me. For a split second, my heart raced, but then I recognized Will, one of the staff members from Jessica's training group. "Jesus, Dan, we saw the smoke and thought there might be a wildfire," Will said, catching his breath. His face was flushed from running. I explained about the sweat lodge and showed him what I'd built. Will seemed impressed and asked if Jessica's group could join in. I hadn't planned on that, but it seemed like a good opportunity for the new staff to experience something they could potentially use in their work with the teens. I told Will to bring everyone down at sunset, and I'd have the fire going and rocks heating. Before he left, I asked, "Hey, did anyone from your group come down here earlier today? Some of my stuff got moved around." Will shook his head. "No way, man. We've been doing wilderness first aid scenarios all day. Nobody's left camp." After he left, I felt that unease settle back over me like a heavy blanket. If no one from the program had been here, who moved that rock, and why did it feel like something was watching my every move with growing resentment? I pushed these thoughts aside and focused on getting everything ready. I built a large fire and carefully placed the lava rocks in it to heat. As the sun set, I could hear voices approaching. Jessica's group arriving for the ceremony. There were 7 of them: Jessica, Will, Katie, our most experienced staff member, Josh, Megan, Tyler, and Alyssa. They were chatting excitedly, carrying water bottles and towels. I greeted them and explained how the ceremony would work, but something still felt off to me. I decided I wouldn't join them inside, partly because of my responsibilities as emergency response. I needed to stay available, but also because something deep inside was telling me to stay out of that lodge. After explaining the process, I helped them bring the heated rocks inside using a pitchfork and shovel. The rocks were glowing red hot, radiating intense heat. Once they were all settled in, I sealed the entrance flap and told them I'd be nearby if they needed anything. I walked down to the creek to sit on a boulder and enjoy the twilight. The stars were just starting to appear, and the only sounds were the gentle rushing of water and occasional calls from nightjars. That's when I saw her. Across the creek, partially hidden in the shadows of a juniper tree, stood what looked like a small Native American girl. She appeared to be around 10 years old, with long black hair in braids and some kind of beaded headband. She was wearing what looked like a simple dress, but in the dim light, I couldn't make out details. What I could see clearly was her expression, a mixture of anger and sadness that sent chills down my spine. "Hello?" I called, standing up slowly. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, just stared at me with those intense eyes. I took a step toward the creek, thinking I should cross and check on her. It made no sense for a child to be out here alone when she suddenly turned and darted into the darkness between the trees. I was about to follow when I heard the screams. Not just one scream, but multiple voices yelling in panic from the direction of the sweat lodge. I sprinted back, my heart pounding. What I found still defies explanation. The sweat lodge was completely destroyed. The tarps had been ripped off and thrown several yards away. The willow frame, saplings I had secured firmly in the ground, had been uprooted and scattered like twigs. The 7 staff members were sitting in a circle, wide-eyed and shaking, around the rocks that had been inside. Rocks that had been glowing red-hot just minutes before were now stone cold, as if they hadn't been heated at all. Most disturbing of all was the fire pit. The massive fire I'd built, which had been roaring with flames when I left, was completely out. Not just dying embers, completely cold ashes, as though it had been extinguished and cold for hours. What happened? I managed to ask, looking at their terrified faces. Jessica was the first to speak. We were just starting. Katie was leading the prayer. Then the whole thing just collapsed. The tarps flew off like they were yanked by something strong. The frame just ripped out of the ground. "Did you see anyone?" I asked, thinking of the girl I'd spotted. They all shook their heads, but Katie's expression changed. "What did you see, Daniel?" I described the Native American girl, and Katie's face went pale. That's when the stories started coming out. Katie revealed that several of them had experienced strange dreams the past few nights. Will had dreamed about a young Native American girl dying when an old cabin burned down. Jessica had felt someone pushing down on her head while she was trying to sleep 2 nights ago. Josh admitted he'd seen a girl running at him in what he thought was a nightmare the previous night. "There's an old homestead ruin about a quarter-mile from here," Katie said quietly. "Pioneer cabin from the late 1800s. I read about it in the area history before we came out here. We pieced it together that night, sitting around the scattered remains of my sweat lodge. The homestead had likely been built on or near native land. Perhaps the girl had died when the cabin burned down. Whether accidentally or deliberately, we couldn't know. But something about building the sweat lodge, about using that specific spot, had triggered something. Nobody slept well that night. We agreed to move Jessica's training group to a different location the next morning. I spent the rest of the week sleeping in the locked cab of my truck rather than in my tent. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something hostile lurking just beyond the firelight. We never told the teens about what happened. What would we say? That we had angered the spirit of a long-dead Native American girl? That something had destroyed a sweat lodge in seconds without leaving a trace of how it had done so? I left that job a few months later. Jessica and I separated the following year. Not entirely because of what happened, but the experience had changed something between us. We both knew what we'd witnessed, but we couldn't talk about it without reopening wounds that were best left closed. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened that day. Maybe it was a sudden windstorm. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe we all experienced some kind of mass hallucination brought on by dehydration or exhaustion. But deep down, I know better. Sometimes when I'm camping or hiking and the sun starts to set, I feel that same sensation of being watched, and I remember the eyes of that little girl, ancient, angry eyes in a child's face, and I know some places hold memories and resentments that don't fade with time. Some spirits don't rest, and some trespasses aren't forgotten, even after more than a century. I've never built another sweat lodge. Some knowledge isn't meant to be borrowed, some ceremonies aren't meant to be performed by outsiders, and some lands still belong to those who lived there first, even if they now only exist as shadows watching from between the trees. Story 10. I still don't know how to explain what happened that summer in Barcelona. It's been 3 years, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or the paranormal. At least I wasn't before. My family has owned this penthouse apartment in the heart of Barcelona for generations. It was originally my great-grandfather's place, a proud man who, according to family stories, always dressed impeccably in suits and his signature top hat. I never met him, of course, but his portrait hung in our hallway for as long as I can remember. That evening started like any other family dinner. It was mid-July, warm but not unbearable, perfect for dining on the terrace with the city lights twinkling below us. My parents had prepared a beautiful spread of traditional Catalan dishes, and we were all in good spirits despite the circumstances. My cousin had brought her husband Ivan along, which was something of a miracle considering his condition. Ivan had been battling cancer for almost 2 years at that point. The doctors had given him months to live, but he fought harder than anyone expected. Despite losing so much weight and strength, he never lost his sense of humor or his love for mischief. He was known for playing pranks on all of us, especially telling creepy stories and sometimes setting the hallway clock to 3:33 in the morning just to freak us out when we got up for a glass of water. "Carmen, pass the pan con tomate," my father said, reaching across the table. I remember this moment so clearly because it was the last normal moment of the evening. As I handed him the plate, I noticed Ivan's face change. His expression shifted from contentment to something I can only describe as pure shock. The color drained from his face and he froze mid-bite, his fork suspended in the air as he stared fixedly at something behind me, toward the hallway that led back into the apartment. I turned to look, seeing nothing but the open sliding door leading to the dimly lit interior. "Ivan, what's wrong?" I asked, thinking maybe he'd spotted a wasp or something that might have triggered his sudden change in demeanor. He didn't respond immediately. He just kept staring, his eyes following something I couldn't see. "Ivan," my cousin touched his arm gently. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to lie down?" When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but quiet. "There's a man in there, a man wearing a top hat and a formal suit. He just walked from your brother's room to the bathroom." The table went silent. My brother wasn't even in town that week. My cousin laughed nervously. "Very funny, Ivan. You almost had us there for a second." But Ivan wasn't laughing. His eyes remained fixed on the hallway. "I'm not joking." Something about the seriousness in his voice made my skin crawl. Ivan was always the first to laugh after a prank, unable to maintain his composure once he'd succeeded in scaring us. But now, he looked genuinely disturbed. "Stop it, you're scaring everyone," my mother said, but her voice trembled slightly. "I swear I'm not making this up," Ivan insisted, finally turning to face us. He was tall, thin, with a neatly trimmed beard. The suit looked old-fashioned, and the top hat was perfectly black. He walked very deliberately, like he knew exactly where he was going. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. I turned to look at him and was shocked to see that his face had turned as pale as Ivan's. They looked like they'd both seen a ghost, which I suppose was exactly what had happened. "Dad?" I questioned, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "That..." My father started, then cleared his throat. "That sounds like my grandfather, the one who originally owned this apartment." The air on the terrace suddenly felt much colder despite the summer evening. My cousin grabbed Ivan's hand. "You're both freaking me out," she said. "Ivan, tell me you're just messing around. This isn't funny." "Swear to me you're not playing one of your pranks," I demanded, looking directly at Ivan. "I swear on everything I hold dear," he replied, his eyes clearer and more serious than I'd ever seen them. "I'm not making this up." My father stood abruptly. "I'm going to check the apartment." He walked inside while the rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Ivan kept glancing nervously toward the hallway. After a few minutes, my father returned, looking slightly less shaken but still unsettled. "There's no one there," he confirmed, though he didn't seem relieved. "All doors and windows are locked from the inside." We tried to resume our dinner, but the mood had shifted irrevocably. Ivan kept looking over his shoulder, and my father seemed lost in thought. My mother attempted to lighten the atmosphere with small talk about neighborhood gossip, but no one was really engaged. Later that night, after my cousin and Ivan had left, I found my father sitting alone in the living room, staring at the hallway. "Do you think he really saw something?" I asked, sitting beside him. My father sighed deeply. "My grandfather died in this apartment, in your brother's room. The description Ivan gave, it was too accurate. The beard, the formal attire, the top hat, he never went anywhere without. Ivan couldn't have known those details." "But why would Ivan see him? He's not even family." "I don't know," my father admitted, "but people who are closer to the end sometimes see things the rest of us don't." The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed it away. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe Ivan had seen a picture of my great-grandfather somewhere and forgotten about it. Maybe the stress of his illness was causing him to hallucinate. For the next few weeks, I tried to forget about the incident. Ivan's condition worsened, and he was moved to my aunt's house for palliative care. The doctors had done all they could. Now it was just about making him comfortable in his final days. I visited him as often as I could. Despite his deteriorating physical state, his mind remained sharp. One afternoon, about a month after the dinner on our terrace, I found him alone in the guest bedroom, staring out the window with a strangely peaceful expression. "How are you feeling today?" I asked, taking a seat beside his bed. "I had another visitor last night," he said without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, a visitor?" "A woman," he replied. "She was sitting right where you are now, dressed all in black with dark hair and the kindest face I've ever seen. She had these large gold earrings that caught the light." I looked around the empty room nervously. Was she a nurse or someone from hospice? Ivan shook his head weakly. "No, she just appeared sometime after midnight. I wasn't asleep. The pain keeps me awake most nights now." "What did she do?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "She tried to talk to me," he said with a small smile. "But I told her I was too tired, too weak for conversation. And do you know what she said? She said she understood, and that's exactly why she had come. She said I could ask her anything I wanted." My mouth felt dry. "What did you ask her?" "That's the thing." Ivan chuckled softly, wincing at the pain it caused him. "I told her I needed time to think about what to ask. It's not every day you get to question whatever she was. She said she understood and would come back tonight." "Ivan," I began, not knowing what to say. Was this the morphine talking? Hallucinations brought on by his medication or lack of sleep? As if reading my thoughts, he reached out and took my hand with surprising strength. "I know what you're thinking, Carmen. But I'm not confused or hallucinating. I've been hallucinating plenty with all these drugs, and this was different. She was as real as you are now." "Did she say who she was?" I asked. "No," he replied. "But I know why she's here. Just like I know why I saw that man in the top hat at your apartment." "Why?" I whispered. His eyes met mine, and I was struck by the clarity and peace I saw there. "They're coming because I'm close now. The boundary gets thinner at the end. They're coming to make it easier for me to cross over." I felt tears welling in my eyes, but fought them back. "Don't talk like that. You don't know that." "I do know," he insisted gently. "And it's okay, Carmen. I'm not afraid anymore." Ivan died 3 days later. The woman in black never returned, or if she did, he never had the chance to tell anyone about it. My cousin was devastated, but took comfort in thinking his final visions were just the morphine easing his transition, but I'm not so sure. The night after his funeral, I stayed at my parents' apartment in Barcelona. Unable to sleep, I wandered out to get a glass of water around 3 in the morning. As I passed the hallway clock, I noticed it was set to exactly 3:33, Ivan's favorite time to scare us. I froze, staring at the clock. I knew for certain it had been showing the correct time when I went to bed. Then I felt it, a distinct change in the air around me. The hallway seemed to grow colder and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I didn't see anything, but I felt a presence move past me, the subtle displacement of air like someone walking by. I've never run back to my bedroom so quickly in my life. I laid awake until morning, thinking about Ivan's words about the boundary getting thinner. Sometimes I wonder if Ivan really did see my great-grandfather that night on the terrace, and if the woman in black was waiting to guide him when he finally let go. I wonder if they're still here sometimes, watching over us from whatever place exists just beyond the veil of what we can perceive. All I know is that I don't set the hallway clock to 3:33 anymore. And whenever I visit my parents, I can't help but glance down the hallway, half expecting to see a tall figure in a top hat walking deliberately from one room to another, going about his business as if he still belongs here. Because maybe, in some way, he does. Story 11. I never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal until last year. Even though I'm only 15, I've always considered myself pretty level-headed. I mean, I watch horror movies without flinching and never bought into those ghost hunting shows. But what happened in our house in Brevard, North Carolina changed everything for me. My mom remarried about 3 years ago, and we moved into my stepdad's family home, this huge old Victorian place that's been in his family for generations. It sits at the edge of town, partially surrounded by woods, with this massive attic that spans the entire top floor. My 3 stepbrothers grew up in this house. Gabriel, 16, Ellie, 14, and Jason, 19, but he's away at college now. From the first week we moved in, things felt off. I'd wake up feeling like someone was watching me. My bedroom door would be wide open in the morning, even though I always closed it before bed. Small stuff, you know, stuff you can explain away. Mom said it was just an old house settling, and I wanted to believe her. But then things started getting worse. About 6 months ago, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when my blanket suddenly yanked off me. Not like it slipped off, but like someone grabbed it and pulled hard. There was no one there, no draft, no explanation. I slept with the lights on for a week after that. Then came the footsteps, heavy footsteps in the hallway at night. But when I'd check, no one would be there. Sometimes I'd hear whispering coming from inside the walls. My stepdad would just laugh it off, saying the house makes weird noises, always has. My mom would give me this concerned look, but wouldn't say anything. What really freaked me out was when Gabriel, my oldest stepbrother at home, told me one night that something had followed him since he was a kid. He said it like it was no big deal, just a fact of life in this house. When I asked him what he meant, he just shrugged and said, "You'll see it eventually, everyone does." Then he went back to playing his video game like he hadn't just dropped a bomb on me. But what happened last Thursday is why I'm writing this. I need to tell someone because I'm still trying to process it, and nobody in my family wants to talk about it. It was an in-service day at Gabriel's school, which is about an hour away in Asheville. He's in some special arts program there. Ellie and I had the day off too, but my parents were both at work. We were downstairs playing Mario Kart in the living room, arguing over who was cheating. It was definitely Ellie, when we heard it. A scream. Not just any scream. It was Gabriel's voice, clear as day, coming from the attic. "Help me! Help! Ellie! Ethan! Please help me!" It was panicked, desperate. I remember dropping the controller and looking at Ellie, whose face had gone completely white. "Did you hear that?" I asked him, even though I knew he did. "That's not funny," Ellie whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't do anything," I said, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. Then it came again, louder this time. "Please, I'm trapped. Help me. It's hurting me." Gabriel's voice was breaking, sobbing between words. It sounded like he was in agony. Here's the thing. We knew Gabriel wasn't home. He was at school, an hour away. There was absolutely no way he could be in our attic. But it was his voice, the exact same pitch, the same way he pronounces Ellie's name with that slight emphasis on the first syllable. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. "Maybe he came home early and snuck in," I suggested, not believing it myself. Ellie shook his head frantically. "He texted me like 20 minutes ago from school. He's not here." The voice called out again, this time in a gurgling scream that made my stomach turn. "Please, I'm dying, Ethan, Ellie." I don't know what possessed me, but I took a step toward the stairs that led to the second floor. If I went up those, I could access the pull-down attic stairs at the end of the hallway. Part of me thought maybe Gabriel was playing some elaborate prank, though I couldn't figure out how. Ellie grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "Don't!" he hissed. "That's not Gabriel, but it sounds exactly like—" "It's not him," Ellie insisted, his fingers digging into my arm. "Listen." And that's when I noticed it. Under the familiar sound of Gabriel's voice was something else, a sort of wetness to the sound, like someone talking with a mouthful of liquid. And underneath that, almost too quiet to hear, was a second voice, speaking the exact same words a split second later, like an echo that was slightly off. "Gabriel!" I called out anyway, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "If this is a joke, it's not funny." The response was immediate. "It's not a joke. Please come help me. I'm in the attic. Something's hurting me." Now the voice had changed slightly. It was still undeniably Gabriel's, but there was something wrong. Like when you hear a perfect AI imitation of someone, all the technical aspects are right, but there's something essential missing. And then, the part that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, the voice started laughing. It began as Gabriel's normal laugh, then morphed into something deeper, more guttural. The laugh got slower, distorting until it didn't sound human at all. Ellie tugged on my arm. "Fuck that, bro," he whispered, his face drained of all color. "We need to leave now." I didn't argue. We bolted for the front door, not even bothering to grab our phones or jackets despite the cold February air. As we ran, the laughing got louder, seeming to follow us through the house. Right as I was pulling the front door open, the voice changed tactics. "Where are you going?" It boomed, no longer just in the attic but seemingly all around us, vibrating the floorboards. "Don't leave me here." Now it wasn't just Gabriel's voice. It was a horrible mixture of voices. I recognized my mom's, my stepdad's, even my own voice in the twisted chorus. We ran all the way to the park, 3 blocks away, where we collapsed onto a bench, both gasping for breath. Ellie was crying, something I'd never seen him do before. "What the actual fuck was that?" I finally managed to ask once I could breathe normally. Ellie wiped his face with his sleeve. "You can't tell anyone I told you this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that thing, it's been in our house for years. Jason used to see it standing at the foot of his bed. That's why he never comes home from college if he can help it." "See what? What is it?" I demanded. Ellie shook his head. "I don't know exactly. Dad says it's nothing, just our imaginations. But I've seen shadows moving when there's nothing there to cast them. Jason said it looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, and its face." He trailed off, staring at the ground. "You've never heard it talk before?" I asked. "Never like that. Never using our voices." He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" We stayed at the park for nearly 3 hours, neither of us wanting to go back to the house. Eventually, my mom called Ellie's phone, which he'd left in his pocket, freaking out because she'd come home for lunch and found the house empty with the door wide open. We reluctantly went back with her, making up some excuse about going to meet friends. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what happened. She already thinks I'm having trouble adjusting to the blended family, and this would just give her more ammunition that I'm trying to cause problems. When Gabriel got home from school around 5, Ellie and I cornered him in his room. I half expected him to laugh it off, but as I described what we'd heard, his face got serious. "You both heard it?" he asked quietly. We nodded. "It was your voice," Ellie said. "Exactly your voice, Gabe." Gabriel sat down heavily on his bed. "It's never done that before," he muttered, almost to himself. "So you know about it," I pressed. "The thing in the house." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Look, this house is old. Sometimes weird shit happens. It doesn't mean anything." "Bullshit," Ellie snapped. "It was calling for help in your voice. It was screaming like it was being murdered." Gabriel's face hardened. "Just drop it, okay? Both of you. It was probably just the wind or the pipes or your imagination. Just forget about it." But I could see it in his eyes. He was scared too. And I've noticed that he never goes to the bathroom at night alone anymore. He always turns on all the lights in the hallway first and walks really fast, like he's afraid something's going to grab him. 2 nights ago, I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of scratching coming from inside the wall next to my bed. Soft at first, then more frantic, like an animal trying to get out or in. I lay there frozen, afraid to move, until I heard a whisper. "Ethan." It was Gabriel's voice again, but wrong, distorted and wet sounding. "Ethan, I know you're awake." I didn't answer. I couldn't. "I'm coming for you next," it whispered. And then the scratching stopped. I haven't slept properly since. Every noise makes me jump. I've started sleeping with my desk chair propped against my door handle. The thing is, I don't know what to do. My mom thinks I'm making it up for attention. My stepdad gets angry whenever anyone mentions anything supernatural about the house. Gabriel pretends nothing's happening, and Ellie's so scared he barely talks anymore. I've tried researching the house's history, but there's nothing that explains this. No tragic deaths, no reported hauntings. It's like whatever's living here has been hiding, waiting, and now it's decided to stop hiding. Last night, I swear I saw something standing at the end of the hallway when I went to the bathroom, a tall, thin shadow that seemed to stretch all the way to the ceiling. When I blinked, it was gone. But the worst part was the sticky, wet footprints I found leading to the attic door this morning. They looked human, but too big, the toes too long and spread apart. By the time I got my phone to take a picture, they were gone, evaporated into nothing. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house. Something lives here with us, something that can sound exactly like the people I love, and I don't think it wants us here. Or maybe it does want us here, just not alive. Story 12. I'm not usually one to share personal stuff online, but honestly, I've been dealing with this for so long now that I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has gone through something similar and can help me make sense of it all. I'm 32 now, but the weird shit I experienced as a kid still gives me nightmares. I grew up in a farmhouse in rural Iowa, the kind that's so isolated you can't even see your nearest neighbor. Just endless cornfields, our property, and the dense woods that stretched behind our house. Those woods. I still get chills thinking about them. Our farmhouse was 10,000% haunted. I don't care how crazy that sounds. I know it was. My parents bought it dirt cheap because it had been abandoned for years. It was my great-great-grandmother's place originally. Everyone in the family talked about her like she was the meanest person they'd ever met. My grandpa would get this look on his face whenever she came up, like he was remembering something awful. The first really freaky thing I remember happened when I was 5. I was in my room playing with these plastic dinosaurs I was obsessed with. It was around 10 at night, and I heard my mom's voice calling me from outside the front door. "Nathan, Nathan, come here. I need your help." It sounded exactly like my mom. Not just her voice, but the way she said my name with that slight emphasis on the first syllable. I remember running toward the front door, but something made me hesitate. We had this strict rule about not opening the door after dark, so instead I went to the kitchen, and there was my mom making my bedtime juice. She definitely hadn't called me. When I told her what happened, her face went completely white. She grabbed me so hard it hurt and made me promise never to open the door if I heard voices at night. Never. That night, I had the first of my recurring nightmares about the witch at my window. In the dream, I'd wake up to see this figure outside my second-story bedroom window, floating in the air. She had this wrinkled face with deep-set eyes that looked almost hollow. The scariest part was that she would slowly try to open my window from the outside, and I couldn't move or scream. I'd just lie there, paralyzed, watching her bony fingers work at the latch. My mom said I would scream so loud in my sleep that they could hear me downstairs. The weird thing was, I wouldn't actually wake up when I screamed. My dad would have to shake me, really shake me, to pull me out of it. I'd come to with this overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible had almost happened. When I was about 7, I started getting what my parents called heat seizures. Looking back, I think they were panic attacks, but they felt way more intense than that. They'd come on suddenly. I'd feel this unbearable heat rising from my feet up through my body. And then I'd sort of black out, but I could still hear everything happening around me. My mom would find me staring blankly, unresponsive. These episodes only ever happened in that farmhouse, usually in my bedroom or the upstairs hallway. By the time I was 10, I had developed this intense fear of windows, especially at night. I couldn't bear to have the curtains open after sunset. I'd feel like something was watching me, waiting for me to look directly at it. My parents were worried, but they mostly chalked it up to an overactive imagination. What they couldn't explain away was the other stuff. The footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs, the doors that would slam shut even though there was no draft, the way our dog refused to go upstairs and would growl at empty corners of the living room, the shadows that moved along the walls when nothing was casting them. We finally moved when I was 14. My dad got a job in another state, and it felt like escaping prison. The first night in our new house, I slept through the entire night for the first time in years. No nightmares, no screaming, no seizures, nothing. It all just stopped. I honestly thought that chapter of my life was over until Amber and I bought our current place 3 years ago. It's not far from my old hometown, about 40 minutes away. It's a nice property, backs up against some woods too, but not the same woods from my childhood. Our house itself is fine. Nothing weird has ever happened inside, but those woods, there's something wrong with them. The first incident happened about 6 months after we moved in. I was out in the backyard, repairing part of the fence before winter set in. It was getting late, the sun was setting, and I heard Amber's voice calling me from the edge of the trees. "Nathan, can you come here a second? I found something." I remember looking toward the woods, seeing this darkening line of trees, and feeling a sudden coldness wash over me. I couldn't see Amber, but her voice was clear as day, coming from maybe 20 yards into the forest. I called back, "What did you find?" But there was no answer, just the sound of leaves rustling. Something felt off. I went inside, and there was Amber, sitting on the couch watching TV with her headphones on. When I asked if she'd just been outside calling me, she looked at me like I was crazy. She hadn't left the house all afternoon. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was the same feeling I had as a kid, that sense that something was trying to trick me. Then it happened again last month. I was taking out the trash at dusk when I heard Amber yelling from the woods, sounding panicked. "Nathan, help, I'm stuck, Nathan!" My heart nearly stopped. I actually took a few steps toward the tree line before I caught myself. I dropped the trash bag and ran inside. Amber was in the shower, obviously not stuck in the woods. When she got out, I told her what happened, and she got really freaked out. We both did. The thing is, it sounded exactly like her, not just a similar voice, her exact voice, with all her speech patterns and the way she says my name. Whatever's out there, it knows how to mimic perfectly. Last week, things escalated. I was in the garden around sunset, and I heard Amber's voice again, but this time it sounded more distant, deeper in the woods. It was calling my name, over and over, each time sounding farther away, like she was moving deeper into the forest. "Nathan, Nathan, Nathan." Each call was a little fainter than the last, like it was trying to make me follow it. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkening trees. For a split second, I thought I saw something moving between the trunks, just a shadow, but person-shaped. Then it was gone. I haven't told Amber about that last incident. I don't want to scare her more than she already is. She's been having nightmares lately, not about a witch at the window like I used to have, but about someone who looks exactly like me standing at the foot of our bed, watching her sleep. The incident that really made me decide to share this story happened just yesterday. Amber and I were watching TV in the living room when she suddenly got this weird look on her face. She was staring out the window toward the backyard. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "I just saw you walk across the yard toward the front of the house with a joint. Where were you going?" I hadn't moved from the couch for the past hour. I told her this, and she got really pale. She said she'd watched me, or something that looked exactly like me, walk from the side of the house toward the front door. She said I had even turned to look at her through the window when she called out to ask where I was going. Then I had continued walking around to the front of the house. She got up to check, but of course there was no one there. No footprints in the wet grass, nothing. We barely slept last night. We kept all the lights on, checked the locks 3 times. This morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small handprint on our bedroom window, on the outside. We live in a 1-story house now, but that window is a good 7 feet off the ground. I'm not sure what to do anymore. Part of me wants to move, but another part of me feels like whatever this is might follow us. It followed me from my childhood in some way, didn't it? Or maybe it's just a coincidence that both properties have these entities. The voice in the woods is what scares me the most. It's getting more frequent, calling me deeper and deeper into the trees. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the forest line at dusk, wondering what would happen if I just followed the voice. Would I find what's been haunting me all these years? Would I finally come face to face with whatever's been trying to lure me away since I was 5 years old? Last night, I could swear I heard my great-great-grandmother's name being whispered from the woods. I never met her. She died long before I was born. But hearing her name spoken like that, it made me wonder if whatever was in our old farmhouse has found me again, or if it never left me at all. I don't know what to do next. All I know is that I'm not opening that door and I'm not going into those woods. Story 13. I've never been a big believer in sharing my personal experiences with the supernatural. Most people just think you're crazy or making stuff up for attention. But after what happened a few months ago, I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has dealt with something similar or can help me make sense of it all. Growing up in a small town in southern Pennsylvania, I lived in what I can only describe as a severely haunted house from when I was about 8 until we moved when I was 12. My parents always dismissed my fears as an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw. The house itself wasn't particularly old or creepy looking from the outside, just a regular 2-story home built in the 70s with faded blue siding. But inside, something wasn't right. The basement was the worst. I refused to go down there alone after dark. Even during the day, I'd feel like someone was watching me from behind the water heater or from the dark corner where we kept old Christmas decorations. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the end of the hallway. I had this closet with sliding doors that would open by themselves in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to the sound of the rollers grinding against the track and see the door standing open. No matter how many times I made sure it was closed before bed, it would be open by morning. But the worst thing, the thing that still makes my skin crawl, was what I used to see standing in my doorway sometimes. It looked like God. It's hard to describe even now. Like a mummy, but not wrapped in bandages. More like dried, leathery skin pulled tight over a skeletal frame. The most terrifying part was its eyes. Huge white eyeballs with tiny black pupils that seemed to bore right through me. When it would appear, I'd freeze under my covers, too scared to even scream. My parents never believed me. They'd say, "Amber, you're just having bad dreams," or "It's just shadows from the streetlight." But I know what I saw. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't shadows. It was something evil. When I was about 10, I got interested in crystals after reading a book from the school library about their protective properties. I saved up my allowance and bought a rose quartz from a little New Age shop in town. The lady who owned the place taught me how to cleanse it under running water while visualizing white light. It sounds silly now, but back then it made me feel safer. Over the next couple years, I added an amethyst and a black onyx to my collection. I was careful about where I got them, only from shops where the owners seemed knowledgeable and respected the stones. I'd wear them on simple cord necklaces during the day and place them on my nightstand before bed. After I started doing this, the appearances of the entity became less frequent, which convinced me that they were working. When we moved away when I was 12, I thought I'd left all that behind me. The new house never had the same feeling, and I gradually stopped wearing my crystals every day, though I kept them in my jewelry box. Fast forward to now. I'm 23 and living in Western New York with my boyfriend, Ryan. We've been in our apartment for about a year, a small cozy place on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. Nothing weird had happened since moving in. It felt normal, safe. About 3 months ago, I was going through some old things and found my crystal collection. Feeling nostalgic, I decided to start wearing them again occasionally. I cleansed them the way I remembered and began rotating which one I'd wear each day. Last month, on a Tuesday night, I wore the black onyx necklace while Ryan and I watched movies. I usually take off my jewelry before bed, but I was tired and completely forgot I was still wearing it. We went to sleep around 11, with Ryan snoring within minutes as usual. I had a nightmare, one of those where you feel like you're falling and jolt awake. When I opened my eyes, the digital clock on our nightstand read 3:15 a.m. The room was mostly dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight filtering through our blinds. That's when I saw it, standing beside our bed, the same entity from my childhood. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was there, that same mummified appearance, those same horrifying white eyeballs with pinpoint pupils staring down at me. But this time it was smiling, a terrible wide grin that stretched its leathery face unnaturally. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like my entire body had turned to stone. It leaned closer, that smile growing wider, and I felt its cold breath on my face. That's when I finally found my voice and screamed. Ryan shut up beside me, fumbling for the lamp switch. What's wrong?" he gasped, half asleep and confused. When the light came on, the entity was gone, but the air felt cold and heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "There was something here," I said, my voice shaking so badly I could hardly get the words out. Standing right there, watching me. Ryan checked the apartment, looking under the bed, in the closets, behind the shower curtain. Of course, he found nothing. He tried to convince me it was just a nightmare, but I knew better. I could still feel the cold spot where it had stood, still see that horrible smile when I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat up with all the lights on, clutching my rose quartz crystal while Ryan slept beside me. I'd taken off the black onyx immediately and put it in my jewelry box. A few days passed without incident, and Ryan had almost convinced me that maybe it had been a particularly vivid nightmare. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in our apartment. The air felt thicker somehow, like something was pressing down on us. About a week after the first incident, I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I was getting back into bed, I noticed something at the foot of our bed, a dark, human-shaped shadow pacing back and forth. It wasn't solid like the entity I'd seen before, more like a silhouette made of dense smoke. I froze, one foot still on the floor, watching it move back and forth, back and forth. It seemed agitated, restless. I slowly reached for Ryan, keeping my eyes locked on the shadow figure. Before I could wake him, it suddenly stopped pacing and turned toward me. I couldn't see a face, just a darker area where a head would be. Then it simply faded away, like smoke dispersing. The next morning I noticed my amethyst crystal was missing from my jewelry box. I tore apart the apartment looking for it, but it was gone, vanished completely. That's when I started to seriously freak out. I didn't tell Ryan about the shadow or the missing crystal. He already thought I was stressed and imagining things, and I didn't want to give him more reason to worry about my mental state. Instead, I started researching online about entities that can attach to people or objects. 3 days later, I was home alone. Ryan was working late, and I was in the kitchen making dinner when I felt that familiar cold heaviness in the air. I turned around slowly, and there, standing in the doorway to our living room, was another shadow figure. This one was more defined than the last. I could make out shoulders, a head, even what looked like eyes within the darkness. It just stood there watching me. I was terrified but also angry. This thing had followed me from my childhood home, had waited all these years to find me again. I don't know where I found the courage, but I actually spoke to it. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. The shadow figure didn't respond, It just continued to stare at me for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned and walked, actually walked, not floated or faded, toward our stairs. I watched as it descended step by step until it disappeared from view. That night, I made a decision. I took the black onyx crystal, wrapped it in a cloth, and threw it in the dumpster behind our apartment building. Something about that crystal had either attracted this entity or given it power to manifest. The rose quartz I kept. It had always felt protective rather than problematic. It's been about a month now since I got rid of the black onyx, and the appearances have stopped. No more shadow figures. No more mummy-like entity with those terrible eyes. Our apartment feels normal again, just walls and furniture and the occasional creak of an old building settling. But I still can't shake the implications of what happened. This thing, whatever it is, followed me from southern Pennsylvania to western New York. It waited over 10 years to reappear in my life. The fact that it was the exact same entity with those distinctive nightmare-inducing eyes, it proves it wasn't just random paranormal activity. It had some kind of connection to me personally. Was it the crystal that triggered its return? Was it always there, just waiting for an opportunity? I don't know. But the thought that something could maintain that kind of connection, could track me across that distance and time, terrifies me more than any horror movie ever could. I still have the rose quartz. It sits on my nightstand, and sometimes I hold it when I can't sleep. But I'm careful now, so careful. I cleanse it regularly and never wear it to bed. I don't know if that thing is gone for good. I don't know if it's still out there somewhere, waiting for another chance to return to my life. All I know is that for now, my home feels safe again. But I'll never forget those eyes, that smile, or the realization that some connections once formed may never truly be broken. Story 14. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of it. I'm Jamie, 17, and I've been running a small ghost hunting YouTube channel for about 2 years now. Nothing fancy, just me and my friends exploring abandoned places around our town with basic equipment. I started with just my phone's voice recorder app and a cheap EMF meter I got for $20 on Amazon. My subscribers kept suggesting I get real equipment, so I saved up from my part-time job and bought some decent gear, a REM pod, cat balls, those light-up balls that flash when moved, dowsing rods, and a pendulum. Nothing too expensive, but definitely a step up. Last month, October 10th to be exact, my friends and I decided to investigate our high school after hours. There have always been rumors about it being haunted. Teachers dying in classrooms, a student who supposedly hung himself in the gym in the 80s, that kind of stuff. We've all been students there for years and never experienced anything strange, but we figured it would make for good content. There were 5 of us that night. Me, my best friend Tyler, his girlfriend Mia, my friend Alex, who's into Wicca and spiritual stuff, and Zach, who's the skeptic of the group but comes along for fun. We got permission from the night janitor, who's cool with us. He's Tyler's uncle, as long as we didn't break anything and were out by midnight. The first investigation was pretty standard. We started in the main hallway, moved to the auditorium, then the gym. We got a few interesting EVPs, some unexplained temperature drops, but nothing that blew our minds. That changed when Alex suggested we try a seance in the drama room. I was hesitant. Seances aren't really my thing. I prefer the technical side of ghost hunting. But Alex had experience with them and assured us she knew what she was doing. We set up candles in a circle, turned out the lights, and joined hands. That's when things started getting weird. Alex began calling out, asking if any spirits wanted to communicate. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped so much we could see our breath. This was mid-October in Georgia. It doesn't get that cold, especially not indoors. "Someone's here," Alex whispered. "They're telling me their name is the Looking Man." I remember rolling my eyes, thinking she was being dramatic for our YouTube video. But then Tyler's EMF meter started going crazy, lighting up from green to red. "Ask it more questions," I encouraged, excited to get good footage. Alex continued, "Is there anyone else here with you?" Through a series of yes-no questions, we discovered there were supposedly several entities present. The looking man, someone called the bad man, Steve, and a female spirit named Rachel. They communicated through the pendulum and EMF fluctuations. The conversation took a dark turn when the spirit started focusing on Tyler. The pendulum began spinning wildly whenever Alex asked questions about him. "They're saying they want Tyler to go to the football field alone," Alex said, her voice shaking. "Why?" I asked. The response made my blood run cold. Using the pendulum and EMF responses to spell out words, Alex interpreted, "to wrap him as a gift for Satan." We immediately stopped the seance, breaking the circle properly as Alex had instructed. Everyone was freaked out, but we chalked it up to Alex being theatrical, or possibly one of us unconsciously influencing the pendulum. Tyler laughed it off, but I noticed he stayed closer to Mia for the rest of the night. We uploaded the footage to my channel and got more views than usual. The comments were filled with people saying we needed to go back and investigate further. So 2 weeks later, October 24th, we did. This time we started in the tunnels beneath the school. Our high school was built in the 50s and has this network of maintenance tunnels connecting different buildings. They're creepy as hell. Dim fluorescent lights flickering, pipes running along the ceiling that make strange noises, and graffiti from generations of students who snuck down there. We spent about an hour in the tunnels with minimal activity. A few orbs on camera that were probably just dust, some unexplained knocking that was likely the heating system. We decided to head upstairs to the 3rd floor where the older classrooms are. That's when everything went to shit. We were in room 318, setting up our equipment, when I felt this crushing pressure on my chest. It came out of nowhere, like someone was sitting on me. I've never had heart problems or panic attacks before. I tried to play it cool, but it got worse, spreading across my chest until I could barely breathe. "Guys, I don't feel right," I managed to say. Zach, always the skeptic, suggested it was just anxiety. But then the REM pod started going crazy, lighting up even though no one was near it. The cat balls we'd placed in different corners of the room all lit up simultaneously and rolled toward the center. "Something's here," Alex whispered. The pressure on my chest intensified. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to get out. "I need air," I gasped. We moved to another classroom, but the pain followed me. The equipment continued to react. EMF spikes, unexplained temperature drops, static on our spirit box. Through the static, we heard what sounded like a man's voice saying "football" over and over. Alex pulled out her pendulum again despite my objections. "Is this the looking man?" she asked. The pendulum swung violently in a circle. "What do you want from us?" she continued. The pendulum spelled out FIELD. The pain in my chest was unbearable now. I was sweating and could barely stand. "We need to leave," I insisted. We took a break, sitting in Tyler's car in the parking lot while I caught my breath. The pain gradually subsided once we were outside. Zach suggested we call it a night, but the rest of us were too invested now. We had never gotten such strong responses before. Alex suggested we try one more location, the small cemetery behind the school. It's just a handful of graves from the original family that donated the land for the school back in the 40s. We gathered around the largest headstone belonging to the family patriarch. Alex conducted another seance, this time using both the pendulum and the spirit box. Almost immediately, we made contact with what claimed to be the looking man again. "He wants to join our circle," Alex said, her eyes wide. "No way," I replied. "You said we should only allow one entity at a time." "He's insisting," she said. "He says he's bringing friends." Against my better judgment, we agreed. The air around us felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. The EMF meter was maxed out, and the temperature dropped again. Through the pendulum and spirit box, Alex determined that multiple spirits were now present, all apparently working under the looking man's commands. They spelled out messages about wanting us to come to the football field. When we asked why, they just repeated, GIFT. Then one by one, each of us started feeling sharp pains in our backs, like someone was dragging their nails down our spines. Mia was the first to cry out, then Tyler, then me. Even Zach, who'd been dismissive the whole time, suddenly grabbed at his shoulder blade. "Fuck this," Tyler said, breaking the circle. "We're done." We packed up our equipment and left the cemetery. Everyone was shaken, but there was also this weird excitement. We had finally captured legitimate paranormal activity. My YouTube subscribers would go nuts, but something kept nagging at me, the repeated mentions of the football field. I suggested we do one final investigation there before leaving. "Are you crazy?" Zach asked, "after what just happened?" "That's the whole point of ghost hunting," I argued. "To make contact, and something clearly wants to communicate with us there." After some debate, they agreed to a quick visit to the field. It was nearly 11:30 by then, the stadium completely dark except for a few security lights. We set up in the middle of the field, placing our equipment in a circle around us. Alex began the seance, but this time the responses were immediate and aggressive. The spirit box spat out fragments of words, mostly insults and threats. The REM pod wouldn't stop flashing, and the temperature around us dropped so dramatically that frost actually formed on the grass at our feet. Through the spirit box, we heard a voice clearly say, "Tyler," followed by "gift" and "rap." Then Mia suddenly doubled over, screaming in pain. "My back! Something's cutting my back!" she shrieked. Tyler lifted her shirt, and we all gasped. 3 long red scratches ran from her shoulders down to her waist, like someone had dragged their nails across her skin with enough force to break it. Blood was beading along the marks. We grabbed our equipment and ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. We made it to the parking lot and piled into Tyler's car. Mia was sobbing. Tyler was furious, and the rest of us were in shock. In the parking lot lights, we examined Mia's back again. The scratches were deep. Not life-threatening, but definitely not something that could happen spontaneously or that she could have done to herself. They were perfectly parallel, evenly spaced, and ran from her shoulder blades down to just above her waist. We never posted that footage online. It felt wrong, exploitative. Plus, none of us wanted to acknowledge what had happened. Mia told her parents she fell into a thorn bush. The scratches healed, but they left faint scars. We haven't gone ghost hunting since. My YouTube channel is effectively dead, but I don't care. Something at that high school football field wasn't just residual energy or a harmless spirit. It was malevolent, powerful enough to physically harm someone, and apparently capable of commanding other entities. The weirdest part: when we were leaving that night, I looked back at the field from the car. For just a second, I swear I saw a tall, impossibly thin figure standing in the center of the field where we had been. It seemed to be looking right at us, at me specifically. Then Tyler turned the corner, and it was gone. I still go to school there every day. I have to walk past that football field to get to my classes. Sometimes I feel like someone's watching me from the bleachers, but when I look, there's never anyone there. At least, no one visible. The looking man. I don't know what it is or why it fixated on us, but I know one thing for certain. We opened something that night that was never supposed to be opened, and I don't think it's finished with us yet. Story 15. I still can't explain what happened that day in Argentina. It's been 3 months, and I've checked every aviation forum, conspiracy theory website, and even contacted some UFO researchers, but nobody has a rational explanation. I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar or can tell me I'm not losing my mind. Last October, my 2 best friends, Bella and Chris, and I had been planning a South American trip for years. We're all in our late 20s, working jobs we don't particularly love, so this was our big escape. We started in Buenos Aires, which was exactly what you'd expect. Amazing steaks, tango shows, and nightlife that puts New York to shame. After a week of barely sleeping and drinking too much Malbec in Buenos Aires, we decided to head northwest to Salta for something different. It's this smaller city nestled in the foothills of the Andes, and everyone kept telling us we had to see the salt flats in the area. So we booked a full-day tour that would take us through the mountains to see these incredible white expanses that look like you're walking on clouds. The tour started early, around 6 in the morning. Our guide, Miguel, picked us up in this white minibus that had definitely seen better days. There were about 12 people total. Us 3 Americans, a German couple, some Brazilians, and a few others. I can't remember. Miguel spoke decent English mixed with Spanish, pointing out landmarks as we wound through these incredible mountain passes. The salt flats themselves were mind-blowing. The sun reflecting off the white surface made everything look surreal, like we were walking on the surface of another planet. We took those perspective photos everyone does, you know, where it looks like you're standing on someone's hand or jumping out of a tiny bottle. Totally touristy, but we didn't care. By late afternoon, around 5 or so, we were all pretty exhausted. The altitude gets to you, and we'd been walking around in the sun all day. The drive back to Salta would take about 3 hours, winding back through the mountains as the sun set. I remember leaning my head against the window, watching the landscape change from barren salt flats to rocky outcrops, and eventually to these beautiful green valleys. The sun was just beginning to set, painting everything this deep orange-gold color. I was half asleep when Miguel suddenly called out something in Spanish that got everyone's attention. He switched to English and said, "Look there, in the sky, very unusual." I straightened up, noticing Bella and Chris were already pressed against their windows on the right side of the bus. I leaned across Chris to see what everyone was looking at. At first, I thought it was just a regular plane. We were in a valley, and I could see what looked like a commercial airliner with blinking lights on its wings against the darkening sky. Nothing extraordinary. Probably just a flight to Bolivia or Chile, I said to Chris, but he shook his head. "Keep watching," he said. Our bus was heading west, back towards Salta, and the plane appeared to be coming in our direction from the west. I figured we were just seeing it from a strange angle because of the mountains. But as our bus continued driving and the minutes passed, something felt off about the whole scene. The plane wasn't getting any closer. I've spent my whole life near LAX in California, so I know what approaching aircraft look like. I know how they move through the sky, how quickly they seem to grow larger as they approach. This one wasn't doing that. It was just there. "Is it just me, or is that thing not moving?" Bella whispered. It wasn't just her. The plane was completely stationary in midair, about 300 yards away from us and maybe 200 feet above the ground. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was more tired than I realized, but when I opened my eyes, the plane was in exactly the same position. As our bus continued along the winding road, our angle to the aircraft changed, which only confirmed it wasn't moving. We could see it was definitely a commercial passenger plane, like a Boeing 737 or similar, with all its windows lit up like it was full of passengers. But there was no logo, no airline markings I could recognize, just a white fuselage with illuminated windows, and it was making absolutely no sound. That's when the goosebumps started crawling up my arms. I've lived near an airport my entire life. Planes make noise, a lot of noise. Even at cruising altitude, you can hear them. This thing was hovering at what seemed like landing altitude, and there was nothing, not even the slightest hum or distant jet engine sound. "Miguel," I called to our guide, "what is that? Is there an airport nearby?" He glanced back briefly but didn't answer my question directly. He just shrugged and said something about unusual things happening in the mountains. Then he turned up the radio, playing some local folk music like he was trying to distract everyone. But nobody on the bus was talking anymore. Even the chatty Brazilian family had gone silent, all eyes fixed on this impossible thing in the sky. We kept driving, following the curve of the valley, which gave us different angles of the stationary aircraft. For about 10 minutes, we all watched in disbelief. The plane remained perfectly still. No dipping, no slight movements you'd see with a helicopter trying to hover, just frozen there against the twilight sky. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but in my shaking hands and with the moving bus, all I got was a blurry mess with some lights. Chris tried filming, but his phone suddenly showed it was out of storage space, which made no sense because he'd cleared it before the trip. As we rounded a bend in the road, the aircraft finally disappeared from view behind a mountain ridge. The moment it was gone, the atmosphere on the bus changed. People started talking again, nervously at first, then more animatedly. The German couple behind us was discussing something intensely in their language. The Brazilians were gesturing wildly. "Did you see that?" I asked Bella and Chris, even though it was obvious they had. "That's not possible," Chris said. "He works as an engineer and is usually the most logical person I know. Planes that size can't hover. They need constant forward motion to generate lift." "Maybe it was a military test," Bella suggested, but even she didn't sound convinced. I turned around to ask Miguel directly, "What was that plane we just saw? Does that happen often here?" His reaction was strange. He made brief eye contact with me in the rearview mirror, then quickly looked back at the road. Sometimes the mountains play tricks with the eyes. The wind currents here are very unusual, but there was no wind that evening. The trees we passed were perfectly still. For the rest of the ride back to Salta, the three of us kept discussing what we'd seen in hushed voices. The German couple eventually leaned forward and joined our conversation. The woman Ingrid said she'd worked for Lufthansa for years and had never seen or heard of any aircraft that could behave like that. "Not even military drones are that large and can hover so perfectly," her husband added. When we finally got back to Salta around 8:30 that evening, I expected everyone from the tour to stick around and keep talking about what we'd witnessed, but strangely, people scattered quickly. Miguel hurried us off the bus with a quick "gracias" and drove away faster than necessary. Later that night in our hostel room, we searched online for anything about unusual aircraft sightings near Salta. Nothing. We looked up flight paths over northern Argentina. The commercial routes didn't cross directly over the valley we'd been in. We even tried checking if there were any military bases in the area that might be testing experimental aircraft, but found nothing conclusive. "Maybe it was a collective hallucination," Chris suggested, though I could tell he didn't believe that either. High altitude, exhaustion, maybe something in the water at the salt flats. But we all knew what we saw. A full-sized passenger plane hovering completely silently and motionless in midair, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. The next morning, we ran into the German couple at breakfast. I expected them to bring up the strange sighting immediately, but they just nodded politely and sat at another table. When I went over and mentioned the plane, Ingrid looked confused for a moment, then said, "Oh yes, very strange," before quickly changing the subject. It was like everyone was suddenly uncomfortable talking about it. We spent 2 more days in Salta, and I tried asking a local tour operator if strange sightings in the sky were common in the area. He gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret and said, "The mountains have many secrets. Some things are not for us to understand." That's it. That's all I've got. We flew back home a week later, and I've been obsessing over this ever since. I've researched every type of aircraft, atmospheric phenomenon, and optical illusion that could explain what we saw. Nothing fits. What bothers me most isn't just the impossibility of what we witnessed. It's how quickly everyone seemed to want to forget it happened. How Miguel changed the subject. How the German couple avoided talking about it the next day. How none of the other tourists from our bus ever mentioned it again when we ran into them around town. It's like we collectively saw something that shouldn't exist, and everyone but me decided it was easier to just pretend it never happened, but I can't forget it. Every time I hear a plane overhead now, I look up half expecting to see it frozen in the sky. So I'm asking, has anyone else seen something like this? A commercial aircraft completely motionless in midair? Or did I witness some kind of glitch in reality that day in that remote valley of Salta that I'll never be able to explain? Story 16. I've never really told this to anyone outside my family. Even now, 20 years later, I get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer afternoon in Spokane. I was 11, maybe 12 at the time. That awkward age where you're starting to want independence but still get freaked out easily. It was mid-July, crazy hot outside, the kind of heat that makes the pavement shimmer. My parents had this split-level house with a big backyard, and they were outside with my younger siblings having a water balloon fight. I could hear them laughing and screaming through the open windows. I remember the sprinklers were going too, making that distinct rhythmic clicking noise as they rotated. I'd opted to stay inside because I'd just discovered this new online game, some basic multiplayer thing that's probably ancient history now. Our computer was set up in the living room, this clunky beige desktop with a CRT monitor that took up half the desk. The screen faced away from the rest of the room, toward the wall, which meant my back was to the open space behind me. I'd been playing for maybe an hour. The house was quiet except for the distant outside noise and the whirring of the computer fan. I was totally absorbed in the game. You know how kids can just zone out completely. The curtains were half drawn to keep the sun out, making the room dimly lit with strips of bright sunlight cutting across the carpet. That's when it happened. At first, it was just this weird feeling, like when you suddenly realize you've forgotten something important but can't remember what. A slight unease that made me shift in my seat. Then it grew into this distinct sensation of being watched, not just casually observed, intensely studied. It wasn't like the feeling came from directly behind me. It was more like someone was standing a few feet back and to my left. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking my mind was playing tricks. I even remember saying to myself, "Stop being such a baby," because I was at that age where being scared of anything felt embarrassing. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. I could almost feel the weight of someone's gaze on the back of my neck. The hairs there stood up, and I got these cold chills despite it being crazy hot inside the house. The computer screen in front of me seemed to fade from my awareness as all my senses focused on whatever was behind me. I started making these little movements, stretching my arms or readjusting in my chair, anything to give me a reason to casually glance back without actually having to fully turn around. Each time I did, there was nothing there, just the empty living room with its worn couch, the TV in the corner, and the hallway leading to the kitchen. The game on my screen kept playing, but I wasn't really seeing it anymore. All I could focus on was that sensation, growing heavier by the second. Then the feeling changed. It wasn't just someone watching anymore. It felt like whoever, or whatever, was there had moved closer. Not right up against me, but like they'd leaned forward, intensifying their focus. Like when someone peers over your shoulder to see what you're doing on your phone, but without the actual physical presence you could point to. I remember my hands freezing on the keyboard. I couldn't move. My breathing got shallow, like I was trying not to make any noise. Sweat beaded on my forehead and upper lip, but I felt ice cold inside. The air in the room felt different too, heavier, charged somehow, not in a dramatic horror movie way with flickering lights or sudden temperature drops, just different. Like the air pressure had subtly changed, the way it does right before a thunderstorm. What scared me most was how specific the feeling was. It wasn't a general sense of unease. I could have pointed exactly to where this presence was standing, about 4 feet behind me and slightly to the left. And it wasn't malicious, which somehow made it even weirder. It didn't feel threatening, just intensely curious. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around in the chair, half expecting to see someone standing there. Of course, there was nothing, just empty space. The living room looked exactly as it had before, sunlight streaming through the blinds, dust motes floating in the air, the faint sound of my family still playing outside. I remember laughing nervously to myself, trying to shake it off. I turned back to the computer, determined to ignore whatever weird anxiety I was experiencing. But as soon as I faced the screen again, the feeling slammed back into me, even stronger than before. It was right there, not touching me, but close enough that if it had been a physical person, I would have felt their breath on my neck. The presence had a weight to it, an attention so focused it felt almost physical. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even pretend to keep playing the game anymore. And then, without really thinking about what I was doing, I whispered, "What do you want?" The words just came out, barely audible even to myself. I didn't expect an answer. I don't even know why I said it. The second those words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room changed again. The presence didn't leave, but it felt like it had reacted, like I had surprised it by acknowledging it. The intensity of its attention shifted, becoming even more focused, if that was possible. That was it for me. I remember shoving the chair back so hard it tipped over. I didn't even bother to turn off the computer. I just ran. Straight through the living room, through the kitchen, and out the back door to where my family was playing. I burst outside, blinking in the sudden bright sunlight. My mom looked at me confused, asking what was wrong. I was pale, sweating, and obviously freaked out, but I couldn't explain it. Not right then. I just mumbled something about wanting to join them after all and grabbed a water balloon, trying to act normal despite my hands still shaking. For the rest of that day, I refused to go back inside alone. I stuck to my mom like glue, which she found weird since I'd been in that don't baby me phase for months. When we finally went in for dinner, I made sure we all went together, and I kept the kitchen light on even though it was still bright outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at my bedroom doorway, half expecting to see something there. I eventually dragged my blankets into my parents' room and slept on their floor, making up some excuse about having had a nightmare. It was about 3 days later when I finally got the courage to tell my mom what had happened. We were doing dishes together, just the two of us, when she noticed I was still acting jumpy around the house. "What's going on with you lately?" she asked. "You've been weird since the weekend." I started explaining, feeling embarrassed but also relieved to finally tell someone. I described the intense feeling of being watched, the specificity of the presence, how it had seemed to react when I spoke to it. I expected her to laugh it off or give me some rational explanation. Instead, she got very quiet. She put down the dish she was drying and just stared at me with this strange expression, not scared exactly, but unsettled. Then she asked, "Where exactly did you feel it standing?" The question caught me off guard. Behind me, a few feet back and to the left, I said, "Why?" She sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for me to join her. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. "I've been seeing this woman, a medium, for a few months now." I remember being surprised. My mom wasn't the type to believe in that kind of stuff. At least I didn't think she was. "I never mentioned it because your dad thinks it's silly," she continued. "But after my brother, your Uncle David, died, I started having these dreams." Uncle David was someone I'd never met. He died in a motorcycle accident in 1987 before I was born. There were a few photos of him around the house, a young guy with a mop of dark hair and a wide smile, usually posing next to motorcycles or computers. "The medium told me something interesting," my mom said. She said David's spirit visits us sometimes. She said he's fascinated by technology, computers especially, because they've changed so much since he died. She told me he likes to watch when we use them, trying to understand how they work now. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never heard this before. No one had ever mentioned Uncle David being into computers or technology. All I knew about him was that he loved motorcycles. David was studying computer science when he died, my mom explained, seeing my expression. He was obsessed with where technology was heading. He built his own computer from parts, a big deal back then. Used to talk about how someday everyone would have one in their home. I couldn't speak. The realization that what I'd felt might have been, probably was, my dead uncle watching me play on a computer. It was too much, especially since I had no way of knowing about his interest in technology beforehand. "The medium said he stands behind people and watches," my mom continued, her voice getting quiet. "Usually on the left side." I felt sick, not because I was scared anymore, but because I realized what I'd done. I'd told him to go away. I'd run from him, my own uncle, someone who was just curious, who just wanted to see what his family was up to and marvel at how far computers had come. "Mom," I whispered. I told him to go away. I asked what he wanted, and then I ran. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's okay. You didn't know." But I felt terrible. I still do sometimes. Not just because I ran from him, but because in that moment of fear, I'd robbed both of us of something, a connection across whatever divides life and death. I've felt that presence a few more times over the years, always when I'm alone with technology, when I got my first laptop, when I set up my first smartphone, brief moments where that familiar sensation of being intensely observed returns. I don't run anymore when it happens. Instead, I sometimes find myself explaining what I'm doing out loud, narrating the technology as if to someone who might be fascinated but unfamiliar with it. I don't know if it's really him or just my imagination keeping the memory alive. But sometimes when I feel that familiar weight of attention, I just say, "Hey, Uncle David," and continue what I'm doing. And you know what's weird? The feeling never seems quite as intense or frightening as it did that first time, almost like he's being more careful now, more considerate of how his presence affects me. To this day, I've never felt anything like the intensity of that first encounter. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember the look on my mom's face when I described where he was standing. She knew. Somehow, she knew, and I guess now I know too. Story 17. I still get chills typing this out, even though it's been 8 months since it happened. I've searched for answers everywhere, asked people who've lived in older homes, talked to paranormal investigators online, even looked into the history of my grandfather's neighborhood. Nothing makes sense. Last year, I moved in with my granddad in his little bungalow in Liverpool. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest one-story house with faded brick and a small garden out front. I was 19, starting college nearby, and my granddad wasn't doing great health-wise. The arrangement made sense. I'd keep an eye on him, and he'd give me a place to crash while I studied. Plus, we got along well. Every morning we'd either walk to campus together, it helped him get his exercise, or if his arthritis was acting up, he'd slip me money for the bus fare. I slept on his couch in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but it was comfortable enough. The house was small, just the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and my granddad's bedroom, a typical single-story bungalow, nothing special about it. One Friday night in January, my granddad went to stay with my aunt. She lived about 30 minutes away, and occasionally he'd spend the weekend with her family. I remember being happy to have the place to myself for once. I ordered a pizza, watched some football highlights, and eventually dozed off on the couch around midnight. I'm not sure what time it was when I first woke up. The room was dark except for the street light filtering through the thin curtains. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized I was hearing noises. Not scary noises, not at first, just people above me. I lay there confused, still half asleep. It sounded like footsteps, not just one person walking around, but several people moving about. I figured I was hearing things. Maybe it was the neighbors, or maybe the sound was coming from outside, but it wasn't. The sound was clearly coming from above me, from the ceiling. I sat up on the couch, fully awake now. The sounds continued and started getting louder. Footsteps, creaking floorboards, the distinct sound of furniture being moved, chairs scraping across a floor, something heavy being dragged. Then came the voices, muffled at first, like when you hear people talking in another room. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tones, and they weren't arguing or anything scary like that. They sounded happy, like people at a party. I checked my phone. It was 3:20 in the morning. The sounds kept building. More footsteps, more voices. What started as a few people now sounded like dozens. I could hear laughter, not creepy laughter, but genuine, having a good time laughter. Someone was telling jokes, I think, because I'd hear a voice go on for a bit, and then several people would laugh together. I sat there on the couch, completely frozen, not necessarily from fear, at least not yet, more from confusion, because the sounds were so normal. It literally sounded like a party was going on upstairs, but there was no upstairs. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The party seemed to be getting more lively. I heard glasses clinking together like people making toasts. The footsteps got heavier, like people were dancing or jumping. The ceiling, I swear to God, the ceiling seemed to vibrate slightly with the weight of all these phantom people. It wasn't until I heard what sounded like a chair fall over and break, followed by a roar of laughter, that I started to really freak out. Because that's when it hit me full force. There was no second floor to this house. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I looked up at the ceiling, scanning it with the beam. It was just a normal ceiling. No trapdoor, no attic entrance, nothing unusual at all. Just the same ceiling I'd been looking at for months. But the sounds kept coming. Louder now. I could almost make out words. It was like listening to a party through a wall. You can't hear exactly what people are saying, but you can tell they're having fun. I heard more furniture moving, more footsteps, what sounded like dancing, all directly above me, in a space that didn't exist. I got up from the couch, still shining my phone light at the ceiling. I walked through the house, room to room. The sounds followed me. In the kitchen, I could hear them above the kitchen. In the hallway, above the hallway. Always directly overhead, like whatever phantom party was happening was mirroring my movements below. My heart was racing now. I wasn't just confused. I was scared. This wasn't possible. There wasn't an upstairs. This was a single-story bungalow. My granddad had lived here for 20 years. I'd been living here for months. There was no second floor. I went outside. The night was cold and clear, the street empty. I stood in the front garden and looked at the house. One story, just like always. No lights on upstairs because there was no upstairs. I walked around to the back of the house. Same thing. One story. No windows above the ground floor. No way for anyone to be up there because there was nowhere up there for anyone to be. But when I went back inside, the sounds were still going. If anything, they were louder, more intense. The party was in full swing now. I could hear what sounded like maybe 100 people, all crowded into a space that didn't exist, having the time of their lives. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the sounds were coming from somewhere else and just seemed like they were overhead. Maybe a neighbor was having a party and the acoustics were playing tricks on me. But no matter where I went in the house, the sounds were always directly above me, and they were too loud, too clear to be coming from somewhere else. I went back to the living room and just stood there staring up at the ceiling. The party raged on above me. I could hear someone singing now and others joining in. I could hear the distinct sound of a glass breaking, followed by cheers. I could hear what sounded like dancing, dozens of feet stomping rhythmically. This went on for about 15 minutes total, but it felt like hours. I was shaking, not just from fear, but from the impossibility of it all. I kept looking up, expecting the ceiling to crack open and reveal, what, a room full of ghosts having a party? I didn't know what to think. Then something happened that made me grab my shoes and run. I heard footsteps, one set of footsteps, moving away from the party noise. They crossed what would have been the upstairs hallway, if there was one, and stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a door opening, and then, clear as day, I heard footsteps on stairs, coming down toward me. But there were no stairs in this house. I didn't wait to find out what was coming down those non-existent stairs. I grabbed my jacket and phone and ran out of the house, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. It was still dark outside, probably around 4 in the morning. I didn't have anywhere to go except my uncle's place. He lived about 10 minutes away, and I practically sprinted the whole way there. I must have looked like a madman, running through the streets of Liverpool at 4 in the morning in my pajama bottoms and an unzipped jacket. I pounded on my uncle's door until he answered. He was confused and irritated until he saw my face. I must have looked terrible because his expression immediately changed to concern. "Thomas, what's happened? Is it your granddad?" I tried to explain, but the words sounded crazy even to me. A party upstairs in a one-story house, phantom footsteps on stairs that didn't exist. He thought I'd had a nightmare at first, or that maybe I'd been drinking, but he could see I was genuinely terrified. "Look," he said, making me a cup of tea with shaky hands. "I've known that house since your granddad bought it. There's never been a second floor. Never." "I know that," I said. "That's why I'm freaking out." We sat up until sunrise. I couldn't go back to sleep, and my uncle, bless him, stayed up with me. When it was light enough, he drove me back to Granddad's house. Everything looked normal in the daylight. No signs of any disturbance, no mysterious footprints, no moved furniture. The ceiling was intact, no cracks or signs that anything had been walking on it. My uncle helped me search the house, even checking for hidden trapdoors or secret passages. Nothing. It was just a normal one-story bungalow. I never slept there alone again. When my granddad came back on Sunday, I didn't tell him what happened. What could I say? That his house was hosting ghost parties when he was away, but I made sure to always stay at a friend's place when he visited my aunt. About a month later, I finally worked up the courage to ask my granddad if he'd ever heard anything strange in the house. He looked at me oddly, but said no, nothing out of the ordinary. Then he paused and added, "Though the couple who lived here before me, they said the place sometimes felt crowded. That's why they sold it so cheap." Silly, right? I've spent months trying to research the history of the house and the land it was built on. So far, I haven't found anything significant. No record of a larger house that was demolished, no major tragedies, nothing that would explain what I heard. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but I know what I heard. Dozens of people walking and talking and laughing and partying in a space that doesn't exist, and those footsteps coming downstairs that have never been there. I still don't have any answers. All I know is that something impossible happened that night. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at my new apartment, I find myself listening carefully, afraid I might hear the sound of a party starting up above me, and I'm terrified that one day I might hear those footsteps coming down non-existent stairs again, only this time they might reach the bottom. Story 18. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to me when I was 11. It's been 15 years, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. I've never been able to make sense of it, and I'm hoping maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can help me understand. It started with a dream, but calling it a dream doesn't do it justice. It was so vivid, so real that even now I can recall every detail with perfect clarity. I went to bed like any normal night. School was busy, and I was tired from a long day of classes and after-school activities. I remember falling asleep pretty quickly, but sometime in the middle of the night I had this dream that felt nothing like a regular dream. Usually my dreams are fuzzy, scattered, and jump around from scene to scene. This was different. It was like I was actually there. In the dream, I was standing outside my grandparents' house. It was their old bungalow with the brick exterior and the garden my grandmother tended so carefully. The sky wasn't day or night. It was this weird in-between time, kind of dusky but bright at the same time. I remember feeling drawn to the front door, like I needed to be there for some reason. As I stood on the walkway looking at the house, the front door slowly opened. That's when things got strange. Instead of seeing the usual foyer with the coat rack and family photos, there was this incredibly bright light pouring out. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but it was brighter than anything I'd ever seen. Warm, golden, and somehow comforting. Then, in the doorway, two figures appeared. The first was my grandfather. I recognized him immediately, even though he had died when I was 5. I didn't have many memories of him, just fragments really. Him pushing me on a swing, his laugh, the smell of his aftershave. But in this dream, I saw him clearly. He was wearing a brown tweed jacket with elbow patches and a white button-up shirt. He looked younger than in the few photos I remembered, healthier, his face full and happy. Beside him stood my grandmother. She was alive at the time I had this dream, but in my dream she looked different, more vibrant, almost glowing. She wore a blue floral dress with a lace collar that I'd never seen before. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. They both looked at me directly, not through me, but at me. They weren't confused or surprised to see me there. They both had these gentle smiles, like they knew something I didn't. My grandmother's eyes held so much love it almost hurt to look at her. Then my grandfather turned to my grandmother and opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, and they hugged each other with such tenderness that I felt tears running down my cheeks. I couldn't hear anything, but I could tell they were happy, complete somehow. After their embrace, they turned back toward the doorway. They didn't wave or say anything, but I felt like they were saying goodbye. They walked further into the house, deeper into that golden light, holding hands. The light seemed to envelop them, growing brighter around their figures until I couldn't see them anymore. Then the door slowly closed and the light faded. I woke up immediately. I was sitting straight up in bed, my face wet with tears. My heart was racing, but I wasn't scared. I felt this overwhelming sense of peace mixed with sadness. The clock on my nightstand read 4:17 in the morning. I couldn't go back to sleep. I just sat there in the dark, replaying every detail of the dream in my mind. When my mom came to wake me up for school, she took one look at my face and sat down on the edge of my bed. "What's wrong, Em?" she asked. I could tell she was concerned by the dark circles under my eyes. I told her everything: the house, the light, my grandparents, the clothes they wore, how real it all felt. As I described the dream, my mom's expression changed. She tried to hide it, but I could see something was wrong. Her face got pale, and she kept swallowing hard like she was trying not to cry. "It was just a dream," she said finally, but her voice sounded hollow. "Get dressed for school. I'll make you some breakfast." I remember feeling confused by her reaction. It was like she knew something I didn't. I tried to ask her about it, but she just kissed my forehead and left the room quickly. School that day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything my teachers were saying. The dream kept replaying in my head: the light, my grandparents' faces, that feeling of witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. During lunch, I sat alone, picking at my food, trying to figure out why this dream felt so important. My friends noticed I was off, but I couldn't explain it to them. How do you tell someone that a dream has shaken your entire reality? When the final bell rang, I felt relieved. I just wanted to go home and talk to my mom again about the dream. Maybe she'd be more willing to discuss it now. But when I walked out of the school building, I saw my dad's car instead of my mom's. That was weird. Dad never picked me up from school. He worked too far away. As soon as I saw his face through the windshield, I knew something terrible had happened. His eyes were red and puffy. He tried to smile when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. I climbed into the passenger seat, my backpack suddenly feeling heavy. "Dad, what are you doing here? Where's Mom?" He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "Em, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear." My stomach dropped. Somehow, I already knew. "It's Grandma, isn't it?" I whispered. He looked surprised, but nodded slowly. "She passed away this morning, sweetheart. Mom's at Grandma's house now, helping with arrangements." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "When?" I managed to ask. "When did she?" "Early this morning, around 4. The nurse at the care home found her during rounds. 4 in the morning, almost exactly when I had my dream." I started shaking. "Dad, I saw her last night, in a dream. She was with Grandpa and they were going away together." My dad reached over and pulled me into an awkward hug across the center console. I could feel him trembling too. "Maybe that was her way of saying goodbye to you," he said softly. "Your mom told me about your dream this morning. That's why she was so upset." The next few days were a fog of grief and confusion. Mom moved through the preparations like a ghost. We picked out clothes for Grandma to be buried in, a dark blue dress, not the floral one from my dream, arranged flowers, and greeted relatives as they arrived from out of town. The funeral was held in the same church where my grandfather's service had been years earlier. I sat between my parents in the front pew, staring at the closed casket draped with white roses, Grandma's favorite. In the foyer of the church, Mom and my aunts had set up a memorial display with photos of Grandma throughout her life, her wedding day, holding my mom as a baby, vacations, holidays, and quiet moments at home. After the service, as people mingled and shared memories, I wandered over to look at the photos more closely. That's when I saw it, a picture I'd never seen before, tucked in among the others. It showed my grandparents standing in front of their house, my grandfather in a brown tweed jacket with elbow patches and a white shirt, my grandmother in a blue floral dress with a lace collar. Exactly what they had been wearing in my dream. My hand started shaking so badly that I nearly knocked the frame over. I called for my mom, my voice coming out in a strangled whisper. When she came over, I pointed at the photo. This is what they were wearing in my dream. Exactly this. I've never seen this picture before. Mom picked up the frame, her fingers tracing their faces behind the glass. This was taken about a year before your grandfather passed away. It's been in an album at Grandma's house. We just found it yesterday when we were looking for photos for the memorial. How could I have known? I asked, my voice barely audible. How could I have seen them exactly like this? Mom didn't have an answer. She just hugged me tight. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had my grandmother's spirit somehow reached out to me as she was passing? Had I witnessed her reunion with my grandfather in whatever comes after this life? I'd never been particularly spiritual or religious, but this experience defied any logical explanation I could come up with. In the 15 years since that night, I've never had another dream like it. I've tried researching similar experiences, reading about near-death phenomena and visitation dreams. Some accounts come close to what I experienced, but nothing quite matches the clarity and the specific details, especially the clothing they wore in that photo I'd never seen. The one thing I'm certain of is that in her final moments, my grandmother showed me something beyond our understanding. She let me see her reunite with the love of her life, crossing whatever boundaries separates this world from the next. Sometimes I still find myself standing outside houses, staring at front doors, wondering what lies beyond them. And sometimes, in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I imagine I can see that golden light again, just for a second before it slips away. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night, but I know what I saw, and somehow, knowing they're together brings me peace. Story 19. I'm still trying to figure out what happened yesterday. My hands are shaking as I type this, and I keep looking over my shoulder. I don't even know if posting this online will help, but I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. For context, I live in a pretty normal 2-story house in Oak Ridge, Michigan with my dad Daniel and my younger brother Ethan. It's a quiet neighborhood, nothing special, the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happens. At least that's what I thought until a few years ago when the weird stuff started. The first time it happened was either spring or fall, I can't remember exactly, but it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I was in my bedroom on the 2nd floor, just hanging out and playing video games. I heard footsteps in the hallway and figured it was Ethan. When I opened my door, I caught a glimpse of him hurrying down the stairs. I remember seeing his gray hoodie and the back of his head as he rounded the corner at the bottom of the stairs. "Hey, Ethan, wait up," I called out, but he didn't stop. I wanted to ask him something about dinner that night, so I followed him down the stairs. When I got to the bottom and turned the corner where I'd seen him go, there was nobody there, just an empty living room. The front door was shut and locked. "Ethan," I called out, checking the kitchen and dining room. Nothing. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop. "Have you seen Ethan?" I asked. Dad looked up, confused. "He took the dogs out back about 10 minutes ago. He's not in the house." I felt this cold sensation wash over me. "But I just saw him come down the stairs." Dad just shrugged. "Must have been seeing things." I went to the back window, and sure enough, there was Ethan in the backyard with our 2 labs, throwing a ball for them. He was wearing a completely different shirt than what I'd seen on the stairs. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired or my mind was playing tricks on me. but it bothered me for days. Several months passed without incident, and I'd almost forgotten about it. Then it happened again. I was doing homework in the dining room when I saw Ethan walk past the doorway toward the kitchen. He was wearing his favorite red t-shirt, the one with the faded logo that he never wants to throw out. I remember specifically because I'd seen him wearing it earlier that day. "Hey, can you grab me a soda while you're in there?" I called out. No response. I got up and went to the kitchen, but it was empty. The back door was closed, and there was no way he could have gone out the front without passing me again. I checked the entire first floor, then ran upstairs calling his name. When I found him in his bedroom with his headphones on, my blood ran cold. He was wearing a blue shirt, not the red one I'd just seen. "What?" he asked when he saw my face. I couldn't even explain it. How do you tell someone you just saw them in a different place wearing different clothes? After that second incident, I started paying more attention. I'd catch glimpses of what looked like Ethan out of the corner of my eye, but when I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway or voices that sounded like him talking to someone, but when I'd check, the house would be empty, or Ethan would be nowhere near where I heard the sound. I never told anyone about these experiences. What would I even say? "Hey, I think there's something in our house that looks like Ethan." They'd think I was losing my mind, but yesterday changed everything. It was around 4 in the afternoon. I was heading down to our finished basement to grab some tools my dad needed from the workbench. The basement is fully finished with a rec room area, a small bathroom, and a laundry room on one side. The lighting isn't great down there, just a few overhead fixtures that cast weird shadows. As I reached the bottom of the basement stairs, I caught movement to my right. I turned and saw what looked like Ethan in his light blue tank top disappearing around the corner that leads to the rec room area. "Ethan?" I called out. No answer. I figured he was ignoring me or couldn't hear me, so I followed. The basement has this L-shaped layout, so you can't see the rec room until you turn the corner. I was sure I'd find him there. But when I turned the corner, there was nobody there. The rec room was empty and still, with that weird basement stillness where the air doesn't seem to move. The TV was off, the couch was empty, and there was nowhere anyone could hide, except maybe behind the old recliner in the corner. I felt that familiar cold sensation again, but stronger this time. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. "Ethan, if you're trying to scare me, it's not funny," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing, just silence. Then I heard a sound from behind me, from the opposite direction where I'd seen the figure go. It came from the laundry room. I spun around, and a second later, Ethan emerged from the laundry room, flicking on the light as he came out. "Dude, you ruined it," he laughed. "I was going to jump out and scare you. Been hiding in there with the lights off for like 5 minutes waiting for you to come down." I just stared at him, unable to process what was happening. He was wearing a light blue tank top, all right, but it was a thin, worn one that barely covered his shoulders. What I had seen going around the corner had more fabric to it, like a t-shirt rather than a tank top. "What's wrong with you?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ethan said, his smile fading. I couldn't find the words. "I just saw you go into the rec room." Ethan's face scrunched up in confusion. "What?" "No, I've been in the laundry room this whole time. Was gonna scare you. But I saw someone in a blue shirt go around that corner," I insisted, pointing to the rec room. Ethan looked uneasy now. "Well, it wasn't me. Maybe you saw Dad. But Dad was outside working on the car. I knew because he'd just sent me down for the tools." "Let's check the rec room," Ethan suggested, probably thinking I was trying to prank him now. We searched the entire basement together. The rec room behind furniture, in closets, the small bathroom. There was no one else down there. "See? Nothing," Ethan said, trying to sound casual, but I could tell he was a bit freaked out too. Maybe it was just a shadow or something, but it wasn't a shadow. It was solid. It moved like a person. It looked like my brother. We went back upstairs, and I tried to act normal for the rest of the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that had settled over me. That night, I kept hearing footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Every time I'd get up to check, there would be nothing there. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly with that feeling you get when someone is watching you. My room was dark except for the dim glow of my alarm clock. As my eyes adjusted, I swear I could make out a figure standing in the corner of my room. "Ethan," I whispered, my heart racing. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, a darker shadow among shadows. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, fumbling in the dark. When I finally turned it on and pointed it at the corner, there was nothing there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. This morning I checked Ethan's room first thing. He was sound asleep in his bed, hadn't moved all night according to him. Dad didn't notice anything unusual either, but I know what I saw. And it wasn't the first time. Whatever this thing is, it's getting better at imitating my brother. The first couple times, it got details wrong. The clothes weren't quite right, or it appeared when the real Ethan was definitely somewhere else. But yesterday in the basement, it nearly had me fooled. The only difference was the slightly different shirt. What scares me the most is wondering what it wants. Why is it pretending to be my brother? Is it trying to lure me somewhere? Is it just toying with me? And why can only I see it? I'm writing this now from my room, door locked. I keep hearing what sounds like Ethan's voice calling me from downstairs, but I texted him and he's at baseball practice. Dad's at work. There's someone, or something, walking around downstairs right now. I can hear the footsteps moving from the living room to the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets. It sounds exactly like what Ethan does when he's looking for a snack after school. But Ethan isn't home. I don't know what to do. I don't think I can tell anyone without sounding crazy. But I know what I've seen. Something is living in our house, something that can look like people we know, specifically my brother, and I think it's getting braver. The footsteps are on the stairs now. I can hear them coming up, slow and deliberate. It sounds just like Ethan's walk, that slight drag of the left foot he's had since spraining his ankle last year. It's outside my door now. "Jordan?" It's Ethan's voice, perfectly mimicked. "Can I come in?" I forgot my key and climbed through the window. Coach let us out early. I'm not opening the door. That's not my brother. Story 20. I've never really told anyone about this except my sister, who ended up having her own experience with him. Even now, 20 years later, I get goosebumps thinking about those nights at my grandparents' farm. I wasn't sure about sharing this online, but after talking with my therapist about childhood trauma, she suggested writing it down might help, so here goes. When I was 7, maybe 8 years old, my parents were going through a really tough time. My dad had just lost his job at the paper mill where he'd worked for almost 15 years. It was the summer of 2003 and the economy was garbage. I didn't understand much of what was happening then, but I knew things were bad because my parents would argue in hushed voices after they thought we were asleep. My mom would often disappear into the kitchen late at night, and I'd hear her crying while running the faucet to mask the sound. To give them space to sort things out, as my grandmother put it, my sister Olivia and I were sent to stay at our grandparents' farmhouse for what was supposed to be 2 weeks, but stretched into almost the entire summer. Their place was about an hour outside of town, this old 2-story white farmhouse with peeling paint and creaky floorboards. Behind it sat this massive red barn that had been there since before my grandpa was born. It was the kind of place that should have felt peaceful, surrounded by fields and quiet, but there was always something off about it. They gave me the back bedroom on the 2nd floor. It had this single window that faced directly toward the barn, maybe 50 yards away. The room itself was small, with faded yellow wallpaper and this ancient twin bed with a mattress that sagged in the middle. Every night, Grandma would tuck me in and leave this little lamp on my bedside table burning because I was afraid of the dark. Olivia got the room next to mine, but her window faced the front yard and the long gravel driveway. The first time I saw him was about a week after we arrived. I'd woken up sometime in the middle of the night needing to pee. It was probably around 2 in the morning, and the house was completely silent except for the hum of the window air conditioner. As I was climbing out of bed, I glanced toward the window and froze. There, standing between the house and the barn, was a figure, tall and thin with these oddly sloped shoulders, like they were carrying a heavy weight, and the hat. I'll never forget that hat. It was wide-brimmed, almost like an old-fashioned farmer's hat, but somehow darker and more substantial. I couldn't see any features, just this perfect silhouette against the moonlight. I remember my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I was too scared to move or even breathe. The figure just stood there, completely still, facing my window, not moving toward the house, not doing anything threatening, just watching. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute or two, I managed to duck down below the windowsill and crawl across the floor to my door, convinced that if I stood up he'd see me and I don't know what. I spent the rest of that night curled up at the foot of Olivia's bed, too terrified to tell her or my grandparents what I'd seen. I told myself it was just a shadow or maybe a tree branch I hadn't noticed before. But the next night I saw him again. Same spot, same stance, same hat. This time I watched him for longer. There was something about the way he stood there, not menacing, but vigilant, like he was keeping watch. I started to notice he would always appear around the same time, between 1 and 3 in the morning, and he'd stay for about 20 minutes before disappearing. Not walking away, just gone between one blink and the next. After about the 5th night, the strangest thing happened. I stopped being afraid of him. Don't get me wrong, it was still creepy as hell having this silent figure watching my window every night, but I started to feel like he wasn't there to hurt me. It sounds crazy now, but I began to feel like he was checking on me, making sure I was okay. I remember one particularly bad night when I'd overheard my grandparents talking in hushed tones about my parents possibly separating. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling like my whole world was collapsing. When I woke up around 2 in the morning, he was there, closer to the house than usual. I actually got out of bed and went right up to the window. We just stared at each other, me looking out into the darkness, him this black silhouette against the night sky. I whispered, "Are they going to be okay?" No response, of course, but I swear I felt something like reassurance wash over me. I slept soundly the rest of that night. One time, and this still makes the hairs on my arms stand up, my grandma had gone into town for groceries and was late coming back. A summer storm had rolled in and the power went out. Grandpa was trying to fix something in the basement and Olivia was having a complete meltdown because she was afraid of thunderstorms. It wasn't even dark yet, maybe 5 or 6 in the evening, but I glanced out my window and there he was, standing closer to the house than I'd ever seen him before. That night, my grandma came home safe despite the flooded roads, and the next day, my dad called to say he'd found a new job. The summer dragged on, and I saw him almost every night. I never told anyone, not even Olivia. I was afraid they'd think I was making it up or worse, that they'd believe me and be scared. My grandparents' farmhouse was already full of enough tension with them constantly worrying about my parents. Then, about a week before we were supposed to go home, I woke up in the middle of the night and he wasn't there. I actually felt disappointed, like a friend had stood me up. I waited, watching the empty space between the house and barn, but he never showed. The next night, same thing, and the night after that. By the time my parents came to pick us up, having apparently worked through the worst of their problems, I hadn't seen him for almost a week. I never saw him again at my grandparents' house. We visited a few more times over the years, and I always checked, but the space between the house and barn remained empty. Fast forward to when I was 19. I was home from college for Thanksgiving, and Olivia and I were staying up late watching movies in her room. Somehow we got on the topic of weird childhood experiences, and I finally told her about the figure I used to see at Grandma and Grandpa's farm. I expected her to laugh or roll her eyes, but instead, she went completely pale. "By the barn?" she whispered. "With a big hat?" When I nodded, she told me her own story. She said she never saw him from her window. Her room faced the wrong direction, but twice that summer when she'd snuck outside after everyone was asleep to sit on the front porch, she was 13 and thought she was being rebellious, she saw him standing by the barn door, just waiting there like he was keeping watch over the property. She said the first time she nearly screamed, but something stopped her. He never moved toward her, never threatened her in any way, just stood there until she went back inside. The second time she actually waved at him. He didn't wave back, but she swears he tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her. She never told me because she thought I'd think she was crazy. We stayed up until dawn that night, comparing details of what we'd seen. The sloped shoulders, the wide-brimmed hat, the feeling that he wasn't there to harm us, but to protect us somehow. What's even weirder is when we realized the timing. She only saw him twice. Once the night before Dad called to say he'd found a new job, and once the night before our parents came to pick us up, newly committed to making their marriage work, the most pivotal moments for our family during that difficult summer. My grandparents sold the farm 5 years ago after Grandpa's health started failing. They moved into a retirement community closer to us. I drove out to the old farmhouse one last time before the new owners took possession. It was winter, the fields were barren, and the old barn looked smaller somehow, less imposing than it had in my childhood memories. I stood in my old bedroom and looked out the window toward the spot where I'd seen him so many times. Nothing but empty space and dead grass. As I was leaving, I whispered a thank you, feeling slightly ridiculous but compelled to acknowledge whatever or whoever had watched over us during that summer when everything felt like it was falling apart. I'm 30 now, with my own place and my own struggles. Sometimes during particularly difficult periods, I find myself glancing out my bedroom window in the middle of the night, half expecting to see a tall figure with sloped shoulders and a wide-brimmed hat standing watch. He's never there, of course, but part of me wishes he was. Last month, my sister called me at 3 in the morning, sobbing. She'd just gone through a horrible breakup and felt like her life was imploding. As she was crying, she suddenly went quiet, then asked in this small voice, "Emily, do you ever still look for him? The man by the barn?" I admitted that I did. "I saw him tonight," she whispered. "Outside my apartment, just for a second, standing under the streetlight. Then I blinked, and he was gone." I don't know what to make of any of this. Was he a ghost, a guardian angel, a shared hallucination born from the stress and fear of 2 children worried their family was breaking apart? I don't have answers, but I know what we saw, and I know how he made us feel, watched over, protected, not alone. Sometimes I think about the history of that old farmhouse, wondering who he might have been in life. Other times I wonder if he's still there, watching over the new family. Or maybe he follows the people who need him, appearing during their darkest moments as a silent reminder that they're being watched over. All I know is that whenever things get really tough, I still find myself looking out windows at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of a tall figure with sloped shoulders and a wide-brimmed hat, standing watch in the darkness. Story 21. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. Growing up, I always rolled my eyes when my friends would talk about spirits or hauntings or whatever. I was the rational one, the one who'd point out that the orb in their photo was just dust on the lens. But after what happened my senior year, I can't explain things away anymore. I've tried for years to make sense of it, but I can't. And honestly, that scares me more than the actual ghost did. It all started with that stupid chalk circle. Everyone at Westlake High knew about it. It was drawn on the back wall of our theater, stage right, behind where we stored the bigger set pieces. No one knew who drew it originally or when, but there was this unspoken rule that you never, ever messed with it. Even Mr. Patterson, our theater director, who was the most logical person I've ever met, would get weird if anyone joked about erasing it. The story was that it contained a ghost, like it was some kind of supernatural prison. Most of us thought it was just a dumb tradition, something to scare the freshmen with. I remember during my sophomore year, this kid Jake tried to scuff it with his shoe as a joke, and Melissa, who was a senior at the time, literally screamed at him until he backed away. That's how serious people took it. The summer before my senior year, The school decided to renovate the theater. New seats, new curtains, fresh paint everywhere. I was psyched because I'd been elected director of the senior showcase that year, a huge honor, and we'd get to break in the new space. When we came back that fall, everything looked amazing, except they'd painted over the chalk circle, just painted right over it like it was nothing. The first week of school, I remember walking backstage with my friend Ellie and stopping dead in my tracks when I realized the circle was gone. The wall was just a flat black now, no trace it had ever been there. Ellie got really quiet and said, "That's not good." I laughed it off, but I felt this weird pit in my stomach. That's when stuff started happening. Small things at first. Mr. Patterson's keys would go missing, then turn up in weird places like inside a prop book or on top of the lighting rig. We'd come in for rehearsal and find all the chairs on stage rearranged into a perfect circle when they'd been stacked against the wall the night before. The janitor, Mr. Reyes, who'd been at Westlake forever, refused to clean the theater at night anymore. He told the principal he'd only do it during daylight hours. When pressed for a reason, he just shook his head and said something in Spanish that I later found out translated roughly to, "The dead don't sleep, so neither would I." The prop closet was the worst. It was this narrow room off stage left, and we started hearing these loud bangs coming from inside it, like someone was trapped in there, pounding to get out. The first time it happened, 3 of us ran to open it, thinking maybe a freshman had gotten locked inside somehow. The second we touched the handle, the banging stopped. We opened the door to find nothing, just props neatly arranged on shelves. This happened over and over, always the same result. One night, I was working late on blocking for a scene, and I swear to God, I saw someone walk across the stage out of the corner of my eye, a tall figure, kind of hunched over. I called out thinking it was the security guard, but when I turned fully, there was nobody there. The stage door was still locked from the inside. Ellie's boyfriend worked in the school library and he helped us dig through old yearbooks and newspaper archives. We found out that 23 years ago, a senior named Matthew Corbin died in a car accident 2 days before opening night of the spring musical. He was supposed to play the lead. The show went on with his understudy, but according to the articles, the cast dedicated the performance to him and left an empty chair in the wings with his costume draped over it. The yearbook had a whole memorial page with his photo, tall, slightly hunched posture, with this intense look in his eyes. I tried to keep all this ghost stuff from affecting the production. We had a great show planned, a collection of scenes from different plays that showcased everyone's talents. But as we got closer to opening night, the technical problems started piling up. Lights would cut out during critical moments. Microphones would screech with feedback, then go completely dead. The soundboard would reset itself mid-scene. Our tech manager, Devon, was losing his mind. He'd check everything, run tests before rehearsal, and everything would work perfectly. Then the actors would take their places, and it would all go haywire. The night before opening, Devon looked at me with these exhausted red eyes and said, "It's not the equipment, Lex. I don't know what else to tell you." Opening night was actually okay. Not perfect, but we got through it. The second night too. But closing night, that's when things got really weird. We arrived at the theater to find the house lights wouldn't turn on. Not a single one. The emergency lights were working and we had power everywhere else, but the main lighting board wouldn't respond. Devon spent an hour trying to fix it while the audience waited in the lobby. Nothing worked. Finally, Ellie, who'd been getting more and more into the ghost theory, suggested something crazy. She gathered the whole cast and crew in a circle on stage, and we all held hands while she addressed the empty theater. "Matthew," she said, her voice echoing in the darkness, "we know you're here, and we respect that this is your theater too. We've worked really hard on this show, and we'd appreciate it if you'd let us perform tonight. We promise to acknowledge you and remember you." I kid you not, the second she finished speaking, every house light came on at once, full brightness. The entire cast gasped. Devon was staring at the lighting board like it had just sprouted tentacles. "I didn't touch anything," he whispered. The show went perfectly that night. Not a single technical glitch. When we took our final bow, I stepped forward and said something I hadn't planned. We'd also like to thank the spirit of Matthew Corbin, who's been with us through this production. The audience probably thought it was a joke, but the cast knew better. As soon as I said those words, I felt this cold rush of air around me, like someone had opened a freezer right in my face. After the show, my parents gave me this beautiful bouquet of mixed flowers. I was so proud and happy that I took them home and carefully arranged them in a vase in my room. My aunt was visiting from Chicago and staying in our finished basement, which had a small guest room. I went down there later to chat with her about the show. We were sitting there talking when suddenly 3 flowers in my bouquet just drooped, like someone had taken scissors and partially cut through the stems. They didn't fall out of the vase, they just slumped over at exactly the same angle. My aunt saw it too and stopped mid-sentence. The flowers had been standing perfectly straight all evening. That night was when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake by acknowledging Matthew at the show. It's like I'd invited him to follow me home. I slept in the basement bedroom across from my aunt's room. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling cold. My curtains were swaying slightly, but my window was closed. I lay there, frozen, watching them move as if someone was running their hand along the fabric. Then my mattress dipped, like someone had sat down on the edge of my bed. I could feel the weight of it. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. After what felt like forever, the weight lifted, and I bolted upstairs to sleep on the couch. The next morning, my aunt came up looking pale. She asked if our dog had been in the basement last night. When I told her no, that he sleeps in my parents' room and the basement door was closed, she got this scared look on her face. She said she'd felt something crawl up from the foot of her bed, moving along her body like a pet jumping up. She'd reached out to pet what she thought was our dog, but her hand touched nothing but cold air. Things only got weirder after that. My 16-year-old sister had a friend stay over for a sleepover a week later. In the morning, her friend looked exhausted and asked who had been holding her hand during the night. She described waking up to find someone sitting on the edge of the bed holding her hand gently. She'd assumed it was my sister until she realized my sister was asleep on the other side of the room. Random loud bangs would echo through the house at night, like someone had slammed a door or dropped something heavy, but we'd search and find nothing out of place. Items would fall off shelves with no one near them. The closet in my room started making the same banging sounds as the theater prop closet. Every time I'd throw open the door, the noise would stop instantly. My dad, who'd been the biggest skeptic of all, finally admitted something was going on when his keys disappeared from the key hook and turned up in the refrigerator behind the milk. "I didn't put them there," he kept saying, over and over. "I know I didn't put them there." This went on for almost 2 years. We kind of got used to it, as crazy as that sounds. We'd joke about Matthew like he was some weird roommate. "Matthew moved my homework again," I'd say, or my mom would call out, "Stop it, Matthew," when the TV suddenly changed channels by itself. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. No more bangs, no more moved objects, no more feeling like someone was watching me. It was just over. To this day, I don't know why. Did Matthew get bored? Did he move on to whatever comes next? Did he find someone else to haunt? I've tried researching more about the original chalk circle, tried to find out who drew it and why. Was it actually containing something? Did painting over it really release Matthew, or was that just coincidence? I'll probably never know. All I know is that I'll never again dismiss someone's ghost story. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a tall, hunched figure standing there watching me. Story 22. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I still can't explain what happened, and part of me is afraid talking about it might somehow bring it all back. But I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. Last year, I moved in with my partner in this older house from the 70s on the outskirts of Oro Valley, near Tucson. The place sat right up against one of the mountains, kind of isolated from neighbors. From the front, it looked like a normal ranch-style home, nothing special, but the layout inside was weird, like whoever designed it had never actually lived in a house before. The strangest part was that my partner and I slept in what was basically a walk-in closet. No windows, just 4 walls and a door. He'd been living there before I moved in and said it was cooler in the summer without windows, which made sense in Arizona, but still felt claustrophobic to me. Then there was this other room, bigger, also windowless, that we used for storage. It connected the main living area to the laundry room, so I had to walk through it multiple times a day. The house also had this massive sunroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that ran the entire length of the back, facing the desert and mountains. For some reason, that room had about 10 couches crammed into it. His family had collected them over the years and never bothered to get rid of any. From day one, something felt off about the storage room. Nobody ever said, "Don't go in there," outright. But I noticed how my partner's family would take the long way around, rather than cut through it. When I asked why, they'd just shrug or change the subject. Every single time I walked through that room, the temperature would drop. And I don't mean a slight chill. It was like walking into a refrigerator. The air felt thick, almost like it was resisting me. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, not just observed, but scrutinized. My skin would prickle, and I'd get this overwhelming sense of dread that would only ease once I was out the other side. About a month after moving in, I finally asked my partner's aunt about the room. She hesitated before telling me that my partner's mom had lived in that room years ago when she was deep into heroin addiction. Apparently, she'd spent months in there, barely coming out, using it as her private space to get high. The aunt said a lot of darkness happened in that room, then quickly changed the subject. That explanation made sense. Residual negative energy from a traumatic time. I tried to convince myself that's all it was. One night in October, I was up late studying in the sunroom. It was around 2 in the morning and everyone else was asleep. I remember it was unusually quiet. No coyotes howling, no wind, just absolute silence. I was sitting on one of the many couches with my textbooks spread out when something in the corner of the room caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from my laptop screen or maybe headlights from a car on the distant road. But then it started to move. It was a ball of light, about the size of a baseball, and it was floating about 5 feet off the ground, not drifting slowly like you'd expect from something weird but harmless. This thing was hovering deliberately. I froze, textbook in hand, watching this orb. It was intensely bright but didn't illuminate anything around it. That's when I realized it wasn't reflecting light. It was light. Pure, concentrated light with no obvious source. Then, without warning, it shot directly at my face. I can't even describe how fast it moved. 1 second it was across the room, the next it was inches from my eyes, blinding me completely. The light was so bright it physically hurt. I screamed and fell backward over the couch, my books flying everywhere. By the time I could see again, it was gone. I ran to our bedroom, shaking, and woke my partner. He listened to what happened, then just said, "Yeah, weird stuff happens in this house sometimes. You get used to it." That was it. No surprise, no concern, like I'd just complained about a leaky faucet. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept seeing the after image of that light whenever I closed my eyes. A few weeks later, we were lying in bed in our windowless room. I was on my phone, and my partner was already half asleep. The only light came from my screen. I happened to glance at the wall and noticed something moving. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from my phone, but when I put the phone down, it was still there. It's hard to describe, but it looked like smoke, except darker, blacker than black, if that makes any sense, like a void in the shape of smoke creeping up the wall. As I watched, frozen, 3 more of these smoky figures appeared on the opposite wall. I grabbed my partner's arm and pointed. "Do you see that?" I whispered. He barely opened his eyes, glanced at the wall and mumbled, "Yeah, they come all the time." Then he rolled over and went back to sleep. They come all the time, like it was completely normal to have shadow people visiting our bedroom. I couldn't look away from them. They didn't have distinct features, no faces or limbs, just vaguely humanoid shapes made of this impossibly dark smoke. They seemed to be watching us, though I couldn't see any eyes. After about 20 minutes, they slowly faded away, except for one. The smallest of the figures melted down the wall and spread across the floor until it reached our bed. Then it rose up again, forming a smaller shape right next to me on the mattress, like it was lying down beside me. I could feel coldness radiating from it, though it never actually touched me. I lay there rigid until morning, afraid that any movement would provoke it. When sunlight finally started seeping under the door, the shadow dissipated. That was just the beginning. The experiences kept escalating. I started having episodes of sleep paralysis, which I'd never experienced before. I'd wake up unable to move, surrounded by a strange light that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. Sometimes I'd hear whispers too faint to make out words, but clearly voices, multiple voices speaking over each other. One night I woke up around 3 in the morning feeling unusually alert. The room was pitch black as always, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized I could see something on the ceiling. Light figures, like negative images of the shadow people, were walking upside down above me. They weren't just blobs of light either. They had distinct forms. A man in what looked like a wide-brimmed hat carrying an old-fashioned briefcase, several women in flowing dresses, and what appeared to be children running between the adult figures. They moved like they were walking on solid ground, completely ignoring the fact that they were on the ceiling. It reminded me of that scene from Spirited Away with the spirits crossing the bridge, this procession of otherworldly beings going about their business. I watched them for what felt like hours, too mesmerized to be afraid. They never looked down at me or acknowledged my presence. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep. The most terrifying incident happened about 5 months after I moved in. I went to bed as usual in our windowless room. My partner was beside me, already snoring softly. I remember checking my phone one last time. It was just after midnight, before falling asleep. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the floor of his grandmother's bedroom on the complete opposite side of the house. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and the clock on her nightstand read 8:43 in the morning. I had no memory of getting up, walking through the house, or entering her room. Thankfully, she was away visiting relatives. I was fully dressed in clothes I hadn't been wearing when I went to bed, a sweater and jeans instead of my pajamas. When I stumbled back to our room, my partner was just waking up. I asked him if he'd seen me get up during the night. "No," he said, looking confused. "You've been here all night." "That's impossible," I told him. "I just woke up in your grandmother's room wearing different clothes." He sat up, suddenly serious. "You couldn't have. You would have had to climb over me to get out of bed, and I'm a light sleeper." We checked the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. There was simply no way I could have gotten to that room on my own, changed clothes, and fallen asleep on the floor. When I think back on it now, what disturbs me most isn't the light orb or the shadow people or even waking up in a different room. It's how everyone in that house seemed to accept these things as normal, like living with supernatural phenomena was just an everyday inconvenience, like bad water pressure or noisy neighbors. I moved out a month later, making up excuses about needing my own space. My partner didn't seem surprised. We broke up shortly after, and I haven't spoken to him or his family since. I still don't have explanations for what happened in that house. Was it haunted in the traditional sense? Were there portals to somewhere else? Was it all somehow connected to the negative energy in that storage room? I don't know. What I do know is that I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, terrified that I'll see those shadow figures creeping up my walls or feel that cold presence lying beside me. I check my room constantly to make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I never ever sleep in a room without windows anymore.